Chapter 689. It means that you should live your own life. Your own life. Jean Hausa explained again in a rare good temper. Chen Feifei understood, but she would rather not understand. Brother Hao, what do you mean? What do you mean by my own life? This is the kind of life I want. No. No. Jean Hausa looked at her calmly. I mean, you can contact more members of the opposite sex, fall in love, and enjoy the process of falling in love. Chen Feifei looked at him in a daze. It took her some time to understand what Jean Hausa meant. Her eyes were filled with shock. After she reacted, her emotions began to lose control. Brother Hao, what do you mean? I'm your fiancé. You want me to find another man? Feifei, you know that I only have sibling feelings for you. Brother Hao. Chen Feifei interrupted him. Don't say any more. I don't want to hear it. Feifei, Brother Hao, I don't want to fall in love with another man. I like you, I love you. I don't want anyone else. I just want you. But I don't love you. In the past, Jean Hausa was worried about Chen Feifei's body, so he had never said it to her so straightforwardly. He was only hinting. Now, he didn't want to continue. Chen Feifei's face turned pale. She looked at Jean Hausa and didn't accept what he said at all. Brother Hao, I know you don't love me, but now you don't even give me a chance to love you? Is that so? Jean Hausa's cold face softened because of Chen Feifei's expression. Feifei, you're still young. You don't quite understand what love is. Why don't I understand? Chen Feifei shook her head and refused to accept what Jean Hausa said. I only know that I like you. I've always liked you. I didn't know anything in the past. I stayed at home every day waiting for you to come back and accompany me. But now, I've changed. Look, I like you. I go to work every day. I work very hard. My dad praised me last time. Brother Hao. I can do anything, but I can't live without you. Don't do this to me. Her heart palpitations were acting up again. She covered her heart with one hand and looked at Jean Hausa with a pained expression. Brother Hao, I really can do anything, as long as you don't abandon me. Feifei. After all, she was the girl he had watched grow up. Jean Hausa's expression was cold, but not as cold as before. You don't have to be like this. I really don't love you. Because you don't love me, you've deprived me of my right to love you, right? There were tears in Chen Feifei's eyes. Because of her illness, her face was very pale, and she looked quite weak and uncomfortable. However, Jean Hausa was not moved at all. Feifei, you need to live your own life. She would not have him in her life. These days, Chen Feifei had been thinking about doing her job well and making Jean Hausa look at her in a new light. But she didn't expect Jean Hausa to be so heartless. Brother Hao. Chen Feifei stepped forward, wanting to grab Jean Hausa's hand. Jean Hausa avoided it, and her face became paler. Brother Hao, do you hate me so much now? What did I do wrong? Jean Hausa didn't answer her question. Feifei, I probably have to go out tomorrow. You can also take this opportunity to think about what I said. He had said everything he could. As for how to get over it, it was her own business. Just as he was about to call Tang Hualai to send her back, Chen Feifei's body went limp and she actually fainted in his arms. Feifei? When she fell to the ground, Jean Hausa had no choice but to reach out to support her. He carried her in his arms and hurried out of the room. An hour later, Qin Yongchang, who had rushed over after hearing the news, looked at his unconscious daughter on the hospital bed. His gaze at Jean Hausa was unusually gloomy. Hausa, is this how you treat Feifei? Jean Hausa was silent. His appearance made Qin Yongchang even angrier. Tell me. How have I treated you all these years? Huh? Not to mention that I've been wholeheartedly nurturing you all these years, just take it as me saving you back then and preventing you from dying on the streets. You should think about thanking me, right? I don't want you to keep talking about our family's kindness to you every day. But no matter what, you know how good Feifei has been to you all these years. If you treat her like this now, will you be able to face Feifei? Zhang Haoze pursed his lips into a straight line. No matter what Qin Yongchang said, he just didn't say anything. Qin Yongchang was furious. He pointed at him and said, You. Okay. So I've raised an ingrate all these years? Huh. Zhang Haoze, you're not being kind like this. Zhang Haoze stood there and let Qin Yongchang's hand almost poke the tip of his nose. From time to time, doctors and nurses passed by in the corridor. Qin Yongchang retracted his hand hatefully. Haoze, you can't be heartless. Uncle. Zhang Haoze finally spoke. You should have seen everything I've done for the Qin family over the years. The Qin family has done me a favor. I know that I've been repaying the favor all these years. But there are some things that you know that you can't force. I only have sibling love for Feifei, not love between a man and a woman. If Feifei really is with me, she won't be happy. You're saying this now? Then why did you agree to be engaged to Feifei back then? Zhang Haoze's expression didn't change, but there was a flash of mockery in his eyes. Do you still need me to tell you what happened during that engagement? Qin Yongchang couldn't keep his face straight, so he could only bring up the favor again. Anyway, the Qin family has done you a favor, and Feifei has also done you a favor. You can't do something like burning the bridge after crossing the river. As he spoke, he grabbed Zhang Haoze's arm. Don't forget. If Feifei hadn't insisted on saving you back then, you would have been buried on some mountain by now. I won't ask for anything else from you. Anyway, you have to be responsible for Feifei. Zhang Haoze looked at Qin Yongchang's hand, and his eyes were slightly cold. Under that gaze, even Qin Yongchang, who had lived more than 20 years longer than him, had no choice but to retract his hand. The doctor happened to come out at this moment to tell them that Qin Feifei had woken up. The two of them entered the ward together. Qin Feifei's face was pale, and her entire body was like a destroyed little white flower. When she saw Zhang Haoze, her eyes turned red again, and she looked like she wanted to say something, but she hesitated. Qin Yongchang's heart ached for his daughter. He glared at Zhang Haoze hatefully and took a few steps forward. Feifei, how are you? Dad, I'm fine. Qin Feifei's voice was weak, which made Qin Yongchang's heart ache. She just stared at Zhang Haoze. Brother Hao, can we say a few words? Zhang Haoze didn't say anything, but his expression became more serious than before. Qin Feifei bit her lip and pleaded, Brother Hao, you don't even want to say a few words to me now? Qin Yongchang glared at Zhang Haoze again. Feifei, Dad will wait for you for a while. I still have something to talk to you about. He went out, and only Qin Feifei and Zhang Haoze were left in the ward. Brother Hao, Feifei. Zhang Haoze looked at her. I'm going to Qing City tomorrow. I won't be back for a while. Brother Hao. Qin Feifei was anxious. She wanted to get out of bed, but Zhang Haoze stopped her. During this period of time, you can think about what you want. What I want is you. You've always been the only one. You're still too young. Zhang Haoze shook his head. Your dad is very worried about you. Take good care of yourself and don't do anything that will make him more worried. After saying this, Zhang Haoze didn't look at Qin Feifei anymore. He turned around and left the ward. Qin Feifei wanted to get out of bed and chase after him, but Qin Yongchang had already come in and stopped her. Zhang Haoze didn't see any of this, but at this time, even if he saw it, he wouldn't care. When he left the hospital, Tang Hua had been guarding him. When he saw him come out, he immediately went forward to open the car door for him. After he got into the car, Tang Hua signaled the driver to drive. He looked at him worriedly. Boss, how's Qin Feifei? Zhang Haoze didn't say anything. Tang Hua raised his eyebrows, and there was a hint of gossip on his face. Qin Yongchang, that old fox, won't use kindness to ask you to repay it again, right? Seeing that Jean Hausa didn't say anything, Tang Hua snorted. That old fox. Does he really think that you don't know what he did later? Jean Hausa didn't respond. Seeing that he wasn't angry, Tang Hua couldn't help but say a few more words, speaking of which, the economic crisis of the Qin family almost caused the entire Qin family to go bankrupt. If it weren't for your help, how could the Qin family still have any glory now? Not to mention their current status in Lin City, if it weren't for you supporting the entire Qin family that year, I'm afraid that the father and daughter would have lived a hard life long ago. How could they still have the face to talk to you about kindness? This old fox is really thick-skinned. Feeling Jean Hausa's gaze on him, Tang Hua didn't back down. That's true. That little kindness has long been repaid. That is, you. Jean Hausa's gaze became sharper and sharper, and Tang Hua didn't say anything else. Boss, don't glare at me. I'm just feeling wronged for you. Jean Hausa continued to be silent. It didn't matter if he felt wronged or not. It was a fact that Chen Feifei and Chen Yongchang had saved him. This was undeniable. It was understandable that Chen Yongchang wanted to repay them. However, it was up to him whether he agreed to repay them in his own way. Because of Mother Shi's arrival, Shi Mengwan felt much better. Other than the mention of Jean Hausa during breakfast, the two of them didn't talk about him anymore. Shi Mengwan recovered very quickly. She felt almost better the next day. As soon as she recovered, she wanted to go to work, but Mother Shi wouldn't let her. The studio is your own anyway. Your body is also your own. You can work at any time, but if your body collapses, you won't be able to. Because Mother Shi was around, Shi Mengwan couldn't go to work, so she could only agree to rest at home for another day. Mother Shi was very happy to receive her daughter's affirmation. She picked up her bag and went out to buy groceries. Just as Mother Shi left, the doorbell rang. Shi Mengwan happened to see Mother Shi's phone on the coffee table. She thought it was Mother Shi who had returned to take her phone, so she went to open the door without thinking too much. When the door opened and she saw Jean Hausa standing outside, Shi Mengwan closed the door without thinking. Jean Hausa stretched out his long legs and directly blocked her from closing the door. The door couldn't be closed, so he took this opportunity to flash in. Jean Hausa? In the next second, she hugged Jean Hausa. Shi Mengwan instinctively wanted to struggle. Don't move. Jean Hausa pressed his chin against her neck. Let me hug you. Shi Mengwan's body was very stiff. She was hugged tightly by Jean Hausa. She couldn't even move. However, she had never seen Jean Hausa like this before. She was a little dazed. She subconsciously moved her body. Jean Hausa let go of her at this moment. He took a few steps back and his gaze fell on Shi Mengwan's face. He looked at her greedily. Have you recovered from your illness? Yes. Shi Mengwan's expression didn't change. Jean Hausa nodded. I need to go out. This time, it might take a long time. It has nothing to do with me, Shi Mengwan answered without thinking. After saying that, she saw Jean Hausa's gloomy face. It was too late to change her mind. Moreover, she didn't think she was wrong. Jean Hausa, you're not anyone to me. You really don't need to report your whereabouts to me. She said that, but Jean Hausa looked at her deeply. I've already made it clear to Chen Feifei. Really? Did it have anything to do with her? He had made it clear to Chen Feifei, but what was the result? Did they break off the engagement? If not, what was the use of him saying all this today? Jean Hausa's brows twitched slightly. He looked at Shi Mengwan with a rare gentleness. Wan, are you willing to give me some time? He couldn't tell her how much time he needed. After all, there was still a lot of trouble in Qing City. It wasn't something that could be resolved in a day or two. He should have endured it and waited for the trouble to be resolved before looking for her, but he couldn't bear to. I'm not willing. Shi Mengwan's words were even more heartless than before. Jean Hausa's eyes darkened. Wan, you should go. Otherwise, my mother will be back later. Jean Hausa stood still, but Shi Mengwan went forward and opened the door. He looked like he couldn't wait for her to leave. Jean Hausa's expression was very ugly. He looked at Shi Mengwan with a very complicated gaze. Shi Mengwan acted as if she didn't see it. Instead, she opened the door a little more. Wan, Shi Mengwan turned her face away. She didn't look at him at all, nor did she listen to his explanation. Jean Hausa was helpless. He looked at the time and was about to board the plane. He couldn't help but look at Shi Mengwan again, but she still didn't look at him. He could only turn around and leave. When he left, his shoulders drooped, and his entire body revealed a great sense of powerlessness. Shi Mengwan's action of closing the door stiffened for a moment. After Jean Hausa walked out, he stopped again. Shi Mengwan didn't want to continue watching, so she closed the door with a bang. After the door closed, she leaned against the door. She told herself that all of this was Jean Hausa acting. It was all fake. She couldn't be soft-hearted, and she couldn't be soft-hearted. That was it. However, she couldn't forget Jean Hausa's disappointed back view before he left. And the words he kept telling her to give him time. The plane slowly landed at Qing City Airport. Jean Hausa came out of the airport and got into the car waiting outside. His expression wasn't good. In fact, he had been gloomy ever since he came out of Shi Mengwan's house. Tang Hua didn't even dare to speak. Now that he had arrived at Qing City, he had no choice but to speak. "Boss, there's news from my hometown." "What news?" "The old man has brought Jean Yi into the ancestral house these few days." "Jean Yi?" He hadn't heard of this person before. "Yes." As Tang Hua spoke, he took out a document and placed it in Jean Hausa's hand. "This has all of Jean Yi's information. Take a look first." Jean Hausa took the document and flipped through it. At this moment, the car drove towards Jean Hausa's residence in Qing City, Cherry Blossom Manor. The Jean family was the #1 family in Qing City. The head of the Jean family, Jean Kuan, had always been the pillar of the entire Jean family. In the past few years, Jean Kuan's health had been getting worse and worse. He, who was gradually getting old, began to delegate some of the power in his hands to his son, Jean Lai. Jean Lai wasn't Jean Kuan's only son. The Jean family had power and influence. When Jean Kuan was young, he was quite unrestrained when it came to women. Other than Jean Lai, he also had several illegitimate daughters and illegitimate children. But those children weren't Jean Lai. Some of them didn't even have the right to enter the Jean family. This wasn't because Jean Lai was outstanding, but because Jean Lai was born from Jean Kuan's only wife. He was the legitimate son, and also the eldest son. He was also the product of the combination of power. Jean Kuan made his fortune by taking the side path. After his business grew bigger and bigger, he knew that a tall tree would attract the wind. In order to protect the Jean family's secret business, he married the daughter of a high-ranking official in the province where Qing City was located at that time. In the first few years of the strong marriage, he treated his wife with some respect. Although he played outside, he didn't have any illegitimate children. But later, Jean Lai's biological mother gave birth to Jean Lai and had a son, so he didn't care anymore. He could play however he wanted outside. More importantly, Jean Lai's mother died when she gave birth to him. Jean Lai was born without a mother. Jean Kuan was young at that time, and Jean Lai's grandfather knew that such a daughter couldn't keep her virginity for her daughter. Therefore, after communicating with each other, they made 2 rules. First, Jean Lai couldn't call another woman mother, which meant that Jean Kuan could forget about marrying again in this lifetime. Secondly, everything in the Jean family in the future must belong to Jean Lai. There were only these 2, and the rest was up to Jean Kuan to do. Jean Kuan had nothing to disagree with. Even if he didn't want to agree, in that kind of situation at that time. The Jean family's business really needed to be taken care of by the external family. Therefore, Jean Kun was quite concerned about his son, Jean Lai. On one hand, he took good care of him. Second, he was also groomed as a successor. However, as Jean Lai grew up, he began to have his own ideas. Jean Kun realized that this son of his was different from him. Jean Kun liked women and power. He seemed affectionate, but he was actually heartless. What about Jean Lai? He had never liked women since he was young. Until he reached puberty, he would avoid women as much as possible. For a long time, Jean Kun thought that his son was sick. When Jean Lai was 18 years old, he even specially prepared 2 women and sent them to Jean Lai's bed. Unfortunately, Jean Lai didn't touch those 2 women at all. Instead, he seemed to be frightened and didn't go home for a few days. Jean Kun was angry. Later, he asked a psychiatrist and repeatedly confirmed that Jean Lai only didn't like the woman he chose, and not because Jean Lai didn't like women. That was why he stopped all actions of sending women to Jean Lai. However, it was precisely this Jean Lai who didn't like women. However, not long after he graduated from university, he took a fancy to a woman from a commoner background. It didn't matter if he took a fancy to her. He just wanted to play with her. Jean Kun would never control his son in these matters. But look at his son. Not only did he insist on being with this commoner woman, he also decided to marry her. This was something that Jean Kun absolutely couldn't tolerate. He chose Jean Lai as his successor and groomed Jean Lai according to the method of a successor. He had to let him follow the path that he had arranged for him. He tried his best to stop Jean Lai from being with that commoner woman, and then gave that commoner woman a sum of money. He wanted that woman to leave his son. However, he didn't expect that commoner woman to be so scheming. After taking his money, she showed the check to Jean Lai. When Jean Lai saw the check, he had a big fight with him. Once again, he showed his determination to be with that woman. Of course, this wasn't something that Jean Kun could tolerate. He didn't raise Jean Lai to let him disobey him. He asked people to keep an eye on Jean Lai and not let him see that woman. He asked people to send that woman away far away. But he didn't expect that his good son. In order to be with that woman, he took advantage of the fact that he was busy with his family's business to look for that woman. When he was young, Jean Lai wasn't fully fledged, so of course he didn't have that much ability. But even if he couldn't get married, he still had an external family. Jean Lai's grandfather came out to help Jean Lai at this moment. Not only did he successfully find that woman, but the 2 of them even eloped. This was simply a provocation to Jean Kun's authority. How could he tolerate such a thing happening? He used the name of the Jean family to set up a bounty. Both the black and white forces received the bounty. However, with Jean Lai's external family opposing him, he couldn't find Jean Lai and that woman for a long time. It wasn't until later that someone finally told him the news of Jean Lai and that woman. Jean Kun hid from the world. The spies of the external family brought people and personally went to look for them. However, he found out that not only did Jean Lai and that woman not break up, they even had a child. Seeing that Jean Lai even had a child, this didn't make Jean Kun calm down. It only made him even angrier. Especially when Jean Kun saw his son, the outstanding son that he had single-handedly raised. The son who wanted to let the other party inherit the entire Jean family business. Just like an ordinary man, he accompanied a woman to go shopping and buy groceries. He looked at his son and actually smiled like an idiot. Holding a child in his arms, he smiled like a fool. He even saw his son changing the diapers of a child. When his son had already become a mediocre, tacky man. Jean Kun couldn't control his emotions at all. To hell with any agreement. Such a son. He didn't want it. But after calming down, he began to vent his anger. The person who made his son become like this was that woman. If it weren't for that woman, his son wouldn't have become such a mediocre man. Chapter 690. The atmosphere in the carriage was very quiet. It had been a long time since Jean Hauser finished reading the information. There was no reaction. Tang Hua couldn't help but be a little worried. Boss? Jean Hausa withdrew his thoughts from the past. Looking at the information in his hand, his face was a little gloomy. His gaze fell on Zhang Yi's photo, and he sneered. If Zhang Yi comes back, won't Zhang Li and Zhang Yang be unable to sit still? His lips curled into a mocking smile, but it didn't reach his eyes. Tang Hua nodded. Zhang Li and Zhang Yang were transferred abroad by the old master. They won't be able to come back for the time being. At this point, Tang Hua's expression suddenly changed. I received news that Zhang Yi seems to have contacted the people in the sky. I think he's just trying to get Tianji's order and use it as a stepping stone to his family. Zhang Hao's gaze became more and more sinister. His gaze was gloomy, as if he had thought of something. Zhang Yi, don't think about the list in the sky. However, I can give him another big gift. Tang Hua looked at Zhang Hao. He narrowed his eyes and looked at the street view of Qing City outside the window. No matter what, Zhang Li and Zhang Yang are part of the Zhang family. Since the old man wants Zhang Yi to go home, then they have to come back and send a congratulatory gift, right? Tang Hua understood and nodded. That's right. This gift can't be light. That's right. Since Zhang Li and Zhang Yang have sent a great gift, I, as their elder brother, naturally have to send a great gift as well. Boss. Tang Hua immediately reacted. Sixth brother is waiting. It's fine. Tell old 6 and old 7 to prepare. When does Zhang Yi come home? That's when we make our move. Don't worry. Zhang Kun lay on the hospital bed and listened to Uncle Chi's reply. He didn't look too well. Ever since he was struck by the wind, his body had not been in good shape. Even if he went out, he had to use a wheelchair. He had to gasp for air just to say a single sentence. More importantly, he couldn't move half of his body. For Zhang Kun, who had once been all-powerful, this was truly more uncomfortable than death. Zhang Yi is back? He's here. Uncle Chi was the butler of the Zhang Manor. He was also one of Zhang Kun's most trusted subordinates. He had followed Zhang Kun for many years. Let him come up. Zhang Yi came up. He looked somewhat similar to Zhang Kun. It could even be said that he was the most similar to Zhang Kun in the third generation. However, this resemblance was only in appearance. The thing you said last time, how is it? Because of the wind, Zhang Kun's voice was very slow. His voice was hoarse, and it sounded unpleasant no matter how one listened to it. Grandpa, I'm sorry. I didn't manage to get Skyline's deal. At this point, Zhang Yi was still a little unwilling. He knew that this was an opportunity for him. However, the current situation had exceeded his expectations. Zhang Kun narrowed his eyes with some dissatisfaction. The Zhang family was a big business, so he didn't put it in his eyes. But he was the one who called Zhang Yi back. If Zhang Yi couldn't come up with some good results, how could he convince the public? Not to mention that he was powerless now. He was old and could no longer support the Zhang family. Originally, Zhang Lai was the heir of the Zhang family, and Zhang Kun had high hopes for him. However, Zhang Lai's two sons, Zhang Yang and Zhang Li, weren't very successful. One had mediocre aptitude, so it was difficult for him to take on such a big responsibility. The other had some ability, but he was arrogant, complacent, and self-righteous. In Zhang Kun's eyes, neither of these two grandsons were qualified successors. Other than Zhang Lai, he didn't know how many illegitimate children he had outside. But at present, there were only a few who could be registered in Qing City. One was Zhang Ji, Zhang Yi's father. The other was Zhang Quan. He gave birth to Zhang Cheng and Zhang Shi. Compared to Zhang Yang and Zhang Li, Zhang Cheng and Zhang Shi were even more mediocre. Zhang Kun didn't like these grandsons. However, there was no one he could use at this time. Not to mention that none of the grandsons in the third generation could catch his eye. Even Zhang Lai and Zhang Kun were very dissatisfied. And he couldn't even say these dissatisfactions. Those secrets of the Jean family made him unable to give up on Jean Lai, his son. Even if he was just putting on a show, he had no choice but to hand over some power to Jean Lai. Not to mention that he was unwilling to hand over these power to Jean Lai. Jean Lai wasn't young anymore. He was already in his 50s. No matter how capable he was, his energy couldn't be compared to that of a young person. The Jean family needed new blood. But among the 5 grandsons, none of them were to his liking. Previously, he had revealed some intentions to let Jean-Yi think that he could enter the Jean family and obtain the Jean family's power. But he didn't expect that this Jean-Yi was also a useless person. Stupid, he wanted to scold him for being an idiot, but now was the time to use Jean-Yi. Jean Kun thought of this and became more and more angry. Jean-Yi was a rare smart person in the 3rd generation of the Jean family. How could he not know what Jean Kun wanted to scold? Perhaps he had thought of something. Jean-Yi suddenly raised his head. Grandfather, don't you want to know who the person who intercepted the order from Tianji and made me return empty-handed was and waste these few months? Jean Kun looked at him, and a bad premonition flashed in his old and turbid eyes. What do you want to say? The person who obtained the order from Tianji is Zhang Haoze. Jean-Yi said word by word, even if he couldn't get anything good. He had to drag someone down with him. Jean Kun's face suddenly turned red, and he started coughing violently. Uncle Chi was behind him, quickly supporting his body and patting him on the back. However, it was useless. Jean Kun was still coughing violently. He glared at Jean-Yi, almost wanting to stare a hole in his body. What did you say? His voice was hoarse and his eyes were bloodshot. Jean-Yi had never been close to this grandfather. Seeing Jean Kun like this, he was a little scared. I said, the person who obtained the order from Tianji is Zhang Haoze. Jean Kun coughed again. This time, he coughed even more violently than before. The order from Tianji wasn't much. Although the profits it brought were considerable, it wasn't necessary for the Jean family. However, the person who obtained the order from Tianji shouldn't be Zhang Haoze. Anyone could do it, but it couldn't be Zhang Haoze, that be asterisk starred. Grandfather, Jean-Yi still wanted to say something more. Jean Kun grabbed the water cup by the bedside and threw it at Jean-Yi. Although he was old, the temper of his youth was still there. This throw almost hit Jean-Yi's head. If he hadn't dodged quickly, his face would have been disfigured. Grandfather, since you're fine, I'll go out first. After saying that, Jean-Yi turned around and left. His footsteps seemed to be chased by a ghost. When Jean Kun saw this, he coughed violently again. No matter how Uncle Chi comforted him, it was useless. It wasn't easy for him to calm down, but Jean Kun's expression was still terrifyingly gloomy. B** starred, he's indeed a B** starred. I should have killed him back then. I should have killed him. It was obvious that it took a lot of effort to speak, but he still said 2 sentences in a row. It could be seen how angry Jean Kun was. After scolding, he looked at Uncle Chi. Give the order. I don't want to see that B** starred live in this world. No matter who you find, no matter what method you use, I don't want to see him again. Uncle Chi had followed Jean Kun for the longest time. When he heard his decision, he couldn't help but frown. Master Kun, Zhang Haoze's ability is not bad. Wouldn't it be a pity to get rid of him just like that? Others didn't know what Zhang Haoze had done all these years, but Uncle Chi knew it very well. If such a capable person could really take over the Zhang family, the Zhang family would definitely be able to continue their glory. Don't even think about it. Jean Kun didn't consider this suggestion at all. Even if my Zhang family's things are thrown away, donated, and squandered, I definitely won't give them to that B** starred. Uncle Chi was speechless, but he could understand Jean Kun's concerns. Jean Kun didn't care if he understood or not. What he needed to do now was to get rid of Zhang Haoze, who was an eyesore. Do as I say. Zhang Haoze didn't know that someone wanted his life. Even if he knew, he wouldn't care. He had been very busy in Qing City for the past 2 days, very busy. On one hand, he had personally negotiated the cooperation with Tianji. With this business, the company would definitely rise to a higher level. On the other hand, he was also preparing a congratulatory gift. In order to build momentum for Zhang Yi, Zhang Kun actually held a banquet for Zhang Yi. Before the banquet began, Zhang Kun specially asked the doctor to come over and examine him. He was also in good spirits. Tonight was a big day, so no matter how angry he was, he wouldn't show it. The Zhang family had been operating in Qing City for decades, and their relationships were very complicated. There were also many people. Since Zhang Kun wanted to support Zhang Yi, the scene naturally wouldn't be small. It could even be said to be quite a big scene. He first appeared with Zhang Yi and introduced him in front of everyone. This was his grandson. In the future, he would be in charge of some of the Zhang family's business. When he said this, he didn't have to care about other people's feelings at all. Naturally, he didn't know that other than Zhang Yi's father, Zhang Ji, the rest of the people present didn't look too good. Especially Zhang Lai. His face was so gloomy that it could almost drip blood. Zhang Kun had always been used to being self-centered, not to mention the thoughts of his son and grandson. He had never cared about anyone's thoughts for so many years. However, just when he was having a good time, 2 uninvited guests came to the venue. Zhang Kun, who was originally bringing Zhang Yi around the venue to identify people, suddenly had a bad premonition when he saw the people. He instinctively looked at Uncle Qi, but Uncle Qi didn't expect such people to come on such a day. He was stunned for a moment. Soon, the 2 of them walked to Zhang Kun's wheelchair. Zhang Haoze got on the plane. The private plane was already ready and could take off at any time. He was still waiting for the final news. 5 minutes later, it was time to take off, and the news he was waiting for had also come back. Tang Hua hung up the phone and walked towards Zhang Haoze with a smile on his face. "Boss, the old man is in the hospital again." Zhang Haoze wasn't surprised at all. Ever since Zhang Kun had a stroke last time, his health hadn't been as good as before. If he was provoked again tonight, it would be strange if he didn't go to the hospital. "Boss, do you think the old man will die just like that?" If that was really the case, it would be too easy for Zhang Kun. After so many years, who knew how many bad things he had done? Yet, there was no retribution at all. No. Zhang Haoze was extremely calm. After a short period of happiness, he was thinking about what they were going to do next. The old man won't die so easily. Even if he was struck by the wind again, or if he fell ill again and couldn't move his entire body, he wouldn't die so easily. After all, the Zhang family was relying on him to support it. Zhang Kun knew very well that if he fell, the Zhang family would have no leader. When the time came, the people outside would attack them together. Even if the Zhang family was big, they wouldn't be able to withstand it easily. What a pity. Tang Hua punched the seat under him. "Boss, you should have killed him directly." Zhang Haoze shook his head. Kill Zhang Kun? No. He didn't have that thought yet. His only thought right now was that Zhang Kun couldn't die so easily. Because that would be too easy on him. He didn't know how much he hated Zhang Kun. He hated him so much that he wanted to cut him into pieces. Hua, keep an eye on him during this period of time. With such a thing happening to Zhang Kun, I'm afraid the Zhang family won't be peaceful either. You have to pay more attention. Don't worry, I know. Tang Hua looked at Zhang Haoze. But you, boss, you have to pay more attention. We've been doing so much recently. I'm afraid that the old man will attack you. No. He probably won't have time to deal with me for the time being. Zhang Haoze thought of something, and the corners of his lips curled up again. He should be having a headache about the big gift I gave him now. Tang Hua smiled and was relieved. Zhang Haoze didn't stay idle even when he was on the plane. He almost didn't rest on the plane. He had been dealing with business. When the plane landed, it was already night time in Lin City. Jean Hausa looked at the time. It was almost 10 o'clock. Tang Hua asked him where he was going. He seemed to have thought of something and answered with 4 words. After he finished speaking, he realized that he was talking about Shi Mengwan's home address. Without taking back his words, the driver drove the car to Ye Yuan apartment. By the time they arrived at Shi Mengwan's home, it was already past 11 o'clock. Boss? Tang Hua looked upstairs and then at Jean Hausa. Jean Hausa got out of the car and turned to look at Tang Hua. Help me send my luggage back to the apartment and pick me up tomorrow morning. Boss, Tang Hua had concerns, but Jean Hausa didn't. He turned around and went upstairs. Standing at Shi Mengwan's door, Jean Hausa closed his eyes. He thought for a moment and took out a bunch of keys from his pocket. If Shi Mengwan saw this, she would definitely scream and scold Jean Hausa for not keeping his word. Jean Hausa didn't have that many concerns. He opened the door with the key and found the direction of the room with familiarity. He had asked before he came. The person he had arranged here told him that Shi Mengwan had already returned to her hometown, so Shi Mengwan was the only one in the apartment now. The living room was very quiet and there was no light at all. The darkness didn't affect Jean Hausa's performance. He just took advantage of the night. He entered Shi Mengwan's room with familiarity. Chapter 691. The room was very quiet, so quiet that he could hear Shi Mengwan's steady breathing. Jean Hausa didn't move either. He just sat there and looked at Shi Mengwan's face. Time passed bit by bit. The east gradually turned white and Shi Mengwan, who was on the bed, turned around. In this way, he was completely facing Jean Hausa. He lowered his head and planted a gentle kiss on her forehead. The kiss was very light, like a feather brushing across Shi Mengwan's forehead. She furrowed her brows in her sleep. Jean Hausa didn't smooth her eyebrows. He looked at her for a while, and after confirming that she didn't show any signs of waking up, he got up and left. When he went downstairs, Tang Hua was still waiting. Seeing Jean Hausa's expression, he sighed. Boss, let's go. Jean Hausa got into the car and looked back at the apartment. I'm afraid there's going to be a tough battle. He had made so many moves recently. The Jean family probably wouldn't let the matter rest so easily. He was afraid that he wouldn't be able to see Shi Mengwan for a while. Boss. Tang Hua looked at Jean Hausa and sighed in his heart. You're too tired. Jean Hausa leaned back and closed his eyes to rest. Just when Tang Hua thought that he would not speak, he let out an extremely faint sigh. It doesn't matter. I'm used to it anyway. For so many years, he had racked his brains, not daring to relax in the slightest. Whether it was at the Chen family or back to Qingcheng. Tang Hua pursed his lips into a straight line and turned his face to signal the driver to drive. His eyes were a little red. After sorting out his emotions, Tang Hua looked at Jean Hausa again. Where are we going next? Let's go into the company and arrange everything. We'll return to Qing City tonight. Yes. Jean Hausa had a lot of things to do in the company. In the past few years, he had put in a lot of effort to expand his business. He needed to have the strength to fight against the Jean family in the shortest time possible. Although it was difficult, it was something he had no choice but to do. It took him a day to settle most of the company's affairs and arrange for the people to guard the company. He signed the 2 contracts that were originally scheduled to be signed. From now on, he would focus all his energy on Qingcheng. That was his main battlefield. Before boarding the plane, he didn't forget to ask Tang Hua about Zhang Kuan's current situation. After our people let Zhang Li and Zhang Yang cause such a ruckus yesterday, the old man was sent to the hospital. It is said that the rescue lasted until the second half of the night. He's still in the ICU. Tang Hua's words were full of schadenfreude, but there was also some worry on his face. Boss, do you think the old man will die just like this? I won't. Jean Hausa sneered. I told you, he still has things to worry about. He won't die just like that. Then, should we postpone the plan for now? No need. Jean Hauser was impatient and didn't want to slow down. Let's see when the old man wakes up. I still have to give them my second big gift. Tang Hua smiled. Big gift? Wasn't this a great gift? The old man would probably faint if he accepted Jean Hauser's gift. It wasn't that he fainted from happiness, but from anger. Jean Kuan was in the ICU. The two brothers, Jean Lai and Jean Ji, stood guard outside. Jean Lai sat on the bench and looked anxiously at the emergency room, which was lit up with lights. His wife, Bai Shuqiao, was sitting next to him. She also looked anxious. Compared to them, although the expression on Jean Ji's face was also very solemn, he didn't look very anxious. He glanced at his son. Jean Yi understood and turned to walk out. Jean Li and Jean Yang blocked in front of him. The two of them didn't look very good at this moment. Both of them had bruised noses and swollen faces. Jean Li's arm was still bandaged. It was obvious that his hand had been broken by someone. Jean Yang wasn't much better. His face was also covered in injuries. Although there were no obvious fractures and it wasn't as serious as Jean Li's, the color of his face was really very good looking. These two combinations made people feel strange and funny at first glance. However, no one at the scene could laugh. Jean Yi, where are you going? You're not trying to escape, are you? Although Jean Li and Jean Yang weren't the most ideal heirs in Jean Kuan's eyes. But no matter what, they had grown up with Jean Lai in the old mansion. These two brothers couldn't be said to be close to Jean Kuan since they were young, but at least they could show their faces in front of Jean Kuan more than those who couldn't show their faces outside. However, the two of them didn't expect Jean Yi to appear out of nowhere. It was fine if Jean Yi appeared. The two of them had suffered such a big loss at Jean Yi's hands. Therefore, the two of them looked at Jean Yi with resentment. Jean Yi wasn't afraid of their provocation at all. He was quite calm. Escape? Do I need to escape? Where do I escape to? It's just that Grandpa told me to do something, although Grandpa is unconscious now. But I still have to finish what Grandpa told me to do. Otherwise, when Grandpa wakes up, he won't be happy. He was still young after all. He was suddenly brought back from the outside. Jean Yi couldn't control the smugness on his face. Jean Li and Jean Yang were furious. Especially Jean Yang. Jean Yi, you want to leave just like that? No way. If you don't make things clear today, don't even think about leaving. That's right. If you don't make things clear, don't even think about leaving. Jean Li glared at Jean Yi and raised his uninjured hand to point at him. You beat the two of us up like this, and you want to leave just like that? Yesterday, Jean Li and Jean Yang entered the venue with injuries all over their bodies. As soon as they entered the door, they rushed towards Jean Yi. Although the two of them were injured, they won because there were two of them. One of them punched Jean Yi, and the other kicked him. Jean Yi was protected by Jean Kuan, so he wasn't injured. However, such a good day was ruined by Jean Li and Jean Yang. Jean Kuan couldn't stand such a stimulation, and he didn't expect that the banquet he had meticulously arranged would have such a big mistake. In his anger, he was directly sent to the emergency room. Idiots. Jean Yi sneered as he looked at the two people in front of him. Don't you go out with your brains? Jean Yi, what do you mean? Jean Yi, you bastard. Jean Yang reached out his hand and was about to swing it at Jean Yi's face again. Jean Yi barely avoided it. He shook his head and looked at the two idiot brothers in front of him with some mockery. You said I beat you up. Are you saying that I did this to you? Without waiting for the two brothers to speak, Jean Yi took a step forward. Why don't you think about it? Would I do such a stupid thing? You're basically being used by others without knowing it. If he isn't an idiot, then what is he? Yesterday was the first time Jean Yi showed his face in front of others. It was supposed to be a great thing. But Zhang Li and Zhang Yang, who were outside, suddenly returned. It was one thing for him to come back, but he was injured all over and even attacked him the moment he arrived. That action was a slap on Zhang Kuen's face. This angered Zhang Kuen. He was so angry that he had to be hospitalized. At that time, Zhang Yi was busy acting as a filial son and grandson in front of the old man. He naturally didn't have the time to bicker with Zhang Li and Zhang Yang. However, he could be considered to have calmed down now. There was someone who wasn't on good terms with him, and was using the Zhang Yang brothers to take care of him. Now that he saw that the two of them still had the time to find trouble with him, Zhang Yi's tone was naturally not very good. If it weren't for your stupidity, Grandpa wouldn't have been sent to the hospital. With the intelligence of the two brothers, they really wouldn't have thought that they had been instigated and used as a tool. Now, they heard Zhang Yi blame the reason why Zhang Kuen was unconscious on them. Zhang Li and Zhang Yang's expressions changed. Say that again? They were out on a business trip, and it could be considered that they were exhausted for the Zhang family. But what news did they hear? Zhang Kuen actually recognized the child of another illegitimate child. He even planned to publicly introduce it into the upper class of Qing City. How could they allow such a thing to happen? Therefore, the two brothers hurriedly finished their work and returned to Qing City as soon as possible. They wanted to ask where this Zhang Yi came from. One had to know that all the children of the Zhang family, without Zhang Kuen's acknowledgement, even if their surname was Zhang, it was useless. But when the two of them returned to Qing City, they were beaten up as soon as they got off the plane. The person who beat them up made it very clear that today was Zhang Yi's good day. He told them to be a little more perceptive and not come to cause trouble. This was something that had never happened to Zhang Li and Zhang Yang. Not only was it a great humiliation to be beaten up, but it was also a clear announcement of their status in the Zhang family in the future. How could Zhang Li and Zhang Yang tolerate it? That was why they hurriedly came to teach Zhang Yi a lesson. Yesterday, they were still fighting with him. Now that they were provoked by Zhang Yi's words, the two of them stood forward together, intending to teach Zhang Yi a lesson. Zhang Yi wasn't afraid at all. You guys are really stupid. If you have the time to look for trouble with me here, you might as well think about how to find the culprit. Aren't you the culprit? Why are you pretending to be a good person here? Zhang Li and Zhang Yang were furious. The two of them took another step forward, and Zhang Li's hand was almost about to poke Zhang Yi's face. A stupid pig is a stupid pig. It's fine if you're impulsive, but you don't have a brain. Zhang Yi's words angered the two of them. Before they could speak, Bai Shuqiao, who had been silent all this time, couldn't take it anymore and stood up. Enough. She walked in front of Zhang Yi and glared at the person who had snatched her son's position. It's not your turn to make decisions in the Zhang family yet. No matter how bad Zhang Li and Zhang Yang are, they were still raised by the old master. Who do you think you are? Zhang Ji was indignant. The juniors were quarreling, so why did Bai Shuqiao jump out? I say, sister-in-law, although you're the sister-in-law, you have to be reasonable. But you have to be reasonable when you speak and do things. The old master was originally angry because of them. Our Zhang Yi isn't wrong. As one of Zhang Kuen's sons, Zhang Ji was quite capable. Otherwise, how could the old man acknowledge his existence when he had so many illegitimate children outside? But no matter how capable he was, he couldn't withstand the old man wholeheartedly supporting Zhang Lai. But he desperately suppressed his sons who were outside. Now, it wasn't easy for the old man to be willing to help the younger generation. Especially since his son had actually caught the old man's eye. As a father, he naturally had to support his son at this time. They were arguing fiercely on this side, but Uncle Qi could only sigh in his heart when he saw it. How decisive and resourceful was Zhang Kuen back then. But looking at the people of the Zhang family now, other than Zhang Lai, who could barely take on the role, none of the remaining third generation could take on a big responsibility. No, there was one. Uncle Qi thought of that person. Although Zhang Kuen didn't like Zhang Haoze, if Jean Hausa could be used by the Jean family could regain its glory in his hands. However, Jean Kuen's order was to take Jean Hausa's life. Uncle Chi hadn't had the time to order his subordinates to deal with Jean Hausa yesterday. He had already prepared the Jean family's kill order, but now, he was a little hesitant. Perhaps there was no need to kill Jean Hausa. The old master didn't have many days left. It was better to think of a way to take Jean Hausa in for his own use. Of course, if he really wanted to achieve that goal, he would probably have to go through some trouble. Uncle Chi thought of this, looked at the people in front of him, and turned around to do what he wanted to do. He had been by Jean Kuen's side for more than 30 years. His words could represent Jean Kuen's intentions. This time, he would let him make his own decision. Jean Hausa didn't care about what the Jean family had done because of him. He was busy preparing the second gift. At night, the people of the Jean family were tired of arguing, so they couldn't be bothered to argue anymore. There weren't many who really cared about the old man. When it was time, everyone except Jean Lai went to rest. Jean Lai couldn't take it anymore and went to rest in the middle of the night. To be honest, there were doctors and nurses in the VIP ward. There was no need for them to guard here. But there was only one purpose for these people to guard here. They wanted Jean Kuen to see them first when he woke up. They wanted to get attention and perform well. Jean Lai had been acting as a filial son for a long time. He was sleepy now, so he naturally went to rest. Other than the bodyguards, there was no one else in the ward. Just like last time, Jean Hausa easily entered the ward. But this time, the old man didn't wake up. In fact, the stimulation Jean Kuen received this time wasn't as big as the last time, but it was even more serious than the last time. It really wasn't because he saw Jean Li and Jean Yang, the two idiots, attack Jean Yi that he flared up. It was because of this that he thought of the same problem as Uncle Chi, the problem that made him the most frustrated and conflicted. That was, the Jean family had developed for so many years. It had been a 100-year-old family since the late Qing dynasty, but when it came to him, it had actually fallen to the point where there was no successor. How could this not make Jean Kuen depressed? Jean Yi was helpless. He was forced to make this choice. But no matter what, he had taught Jean Li and Jean Yang for a period of time, but they were still so stupid and so disregarding the overall situation. As the head of the Jean family, he wasn't qualified. Even as a descendant of the Jean family, he wasn't qualified. After being provoked like this, Jean Kuen became serious again. He had woken up in the afternoon, but when he woke up, he heard Jean Li and Jean Yang arguing outside about teaching Jean Yi a lesson. As soon as he was provoked, he fainted again. Jean Hausa didn't have much time for Jean Kuen. It was his business if he liked to sleep. His time was very precious. He took a look, picked up a glass of water from the bedside, and slowly poured it on Jean Kuen's face. Jean Kuen was old, and he hadn't recovered yet. Being splashed with cold water on his face, even though it wasn't cold in this season, made him uncomfortable. Who? He woke up at the first moment and immediately discovered Jean Hausa standing by his bed. Jean Kuen remembered, but his body had just suffered a stroke. How could he have the strength? Jean Hausa casually put the cup in his hand aside. He looked down at Jean Kuen coldly. Jean Kuen wiped the water off his face. When he saw Jean Hausa, he was shocked. Didn't he ask Uncle Chi to deal with this person? Why was he still here? What about me? Jean Hausa sneered. I'm here because I have a gift for you. Jean Kuen looked at him defensively. He didn't believe that Jean Hausa would be so kind. You, get out. I don't want your gift. Don't you want to hear what I'm giving you? When Jean Hausa spoke, the smile on his face didn't reach his eyes. His entire person looked cold and gloomy. Get out. I don't want to see you. There was killing intent in Jean Kuen's eyes. After today's matter, he would definitely ask Uncle Chi to kill Jean Hausa. I don't want to see you either. I've already said that I'm just here to give you a gift. Jean Hauser looked at his face and said 2 words very slowly. Jean Kuhn's expression changed. He tried to get up. Jean Hauser reached out a hand and pressed it on his chest. Jean Kuhn was old, so he couldn't break free at all. You be ****, let go of me. He cursed, and Jean Hauser's strength increased by 30%. Jean Kuhn's face suddenly turned pale. He glared at Jean Hauser, almost glaring a hole in his eyes. Do you know why the celebrity house and the fragrance house were closed? Jean Hauser exerted force in his hand. Looking at Jean Kuhn's angry and painful appearance, but he couldn't resist, he only felt happy. One was closed because it was involved in drugs. The other was closed because it was suspected of organizing to sell silver. At this point, Jean Hauser smiled. Next is the Heavenly Fragrance Restaurant, Spring of the 4 Seasons. In the future, these businesses will close down in your hands one by one. Are you happy? What Jean Hauser said was all about the Jean family's business that was making a lot of money every day. Every one of them had a chain. They operated different projects in different categories. The only thing they had in common was that these were all profitable businesses. Jean Kuhn pointed at Jean Hauser. No one had told him about this matter yet. It must have just happened today. Oh, right. I'm afraid that you'll be too worried and won't be able to recuperate in the hospital. He purposely snored. Since it's a seizure, it'll naturally take a little longer. It's not long to seize it for a year or so, don't you think? Be ****, you be ****. Other than this sentence, Jean Kuhn didn't have any other words to curse. Jean Hauser sneered and finally let go of his hand. He took out a handkerchief from his pocket and slowly wiped his hand. In the end, he threw the handkerchief at Jean Kuhn's face. Jean Kuhn was so angry by his action that he coughed again. Jean Hauser moved his face closer. This is just the beginning. Don't worry. I will definitely destroy the Jean family in my hands. Jean Kuhn couldn't even speak properly. He could only point at Jean Hauser and keep panting. Jean Hauser wasn't in the mood to admire his sorry state anymore. He turned around and left. He was about to go downstairs, but he accidentally saw Jean lie in the corridor outside. Seeing the person, Jean Hauser directly walked past him and was about to leave. However, Jean Lai blocked in front of him. Why are you here? As he spoke, he looked in the direction of the ward. He didn't know what Jean Hauser wanted to do. Jean Hauser ignored him and walked past him. Seeing him like this, Jean Lai couldn't help but say, Jean Hauser, no matter what, you're a descendant of the Jean family. Mr. Jean, be careful with your words. Jean Hauser stood still and said without turning his head, although my surname is Jean, I'm not a descendant of the Jean family. I'm Jean Lai didn't finish his sentence. Jean Hauser suddenly turned around. He reached out and grabbed the front of Jean Lai's shirt. Mr. Jean. He used all his strength. The sinister expression on his face made people think that he was Satan from hell. What are you to me? Say it, why aren't you saying it? Jean Lai shrunk his neck. Facing Jean Hauser's expression, he didn't dare to answer him for a moment. If Mr. Jean wants to live longer, it's better to think clearly. Jean Hauser stood up straight as he spoke. His cold eyes didn't have a trace of warmth. After all, to me, my parents are already dead. Jean Lai's face was a little pale. Jean Hauser let go of his hand and took a step back. He clapped his hands, his gaze cold. If Mr. Jean doesn't know how to speak, I don't mind sending you to meet them in advance. What do you think? Jean Lai's aura was instantly suppressed by Jean Hauser, and he didn't dare to speak again. Jean Hauser looked at him and felt bored. He turned around and left. For the next month, Jean Hauser didn't go anywhere. He stayed in Qing City and focused on dealing with the Jean family's businesses. The Jean family had many businesses, including the entertainment industry, the real estate industry, and the electronics industry. They were all involved in traditional industries. A month wasn't a short time, but the Jean family had too many businesses. With his current ability, it was impossible to destroy the Jean family in a day. He could only destroy them one by one. Jean Hauser had bought a business in Qing City a few years ago. He bought the best location in the Cherry Blossom Villa. During this period of time, he had been living in the Cherry Blossom Villa. On one hand, he had to deal with the Jean family, and on the other hand, he had to prepare to move some of the company's main businesses to Qing City. Jean Hauser didn't expect that after more than a month of silence, someone from the Jean family would actually take the initiative to look for him. Looking at Uncle Chi in front of him, Jean Hauser sat down on the sofa expressionlessly. The Cherry Blossom Villa was decorated according to his preferences. It was simple but grand. Uncle Chi came in and took a few glances. When he saw Jean Hauser, he took 2 steps forward and stood opposite him. Hauser. Uncle Chi was older than Jean Lai. He called Jean Hauser's name to show his friendliness. Unfortunately, the person he met was Jean Hauser. What's the matter? Uncle Chi smiled bitterly in his heart. Jean Hauser had suppressed some of the Jean family's businesses, but now he was asking him what was the matter. Hauser, the Jean family is your family no matter what. What you're doing now isn't appropriate, right? Oh. What did I do? Jean Hauser raised his eyebrows, as if he didn't quite understand what Uncle Chi meant. I won't repeat what you did. From the celebrity hall until now, many of the Jean family's businesses had been involved. Although it wasn't enough to shake the foundation, as a result, the entire Jean family was indeed in a state of panic. Uncle Chi originally wanted to get someone to make a move on Jean Hauser, but after these days, not only did he not make a move, but he also couldn't bear to. Chapter 692. Get the Jean family? Jean Hauser felt that this person was ridiculous. When did he ever want to get the Jean family? Whether it was money or status, he preferred to earn it with his own hands. He didn't want anything from the Jean family. In his heart, there would only be one outcome for the Jean family in the future, and that was to be destroyed by him with his own hands. He was already doing so, and it was only a matter of time before he reached the final step. Even Jean Hauser had to admit that it wasn't unreasonable for Jean Kuan to be ruthless and ruthless. Just look at the power and momentum that the Jean family had developed in his hands all these years. But so what? He was not afraid at all. Did you come here just to talk nonsense? Uncle Chi choked. When he thought of his purpose in coming here, he wanted to explode, but he had no choice but to calm himself down. The Jean family had a large business. I'm sure you've seen the abilities of the other descendants of the 3rd generation. Since that was the case, why not take a step back? Your goal is just to get the Jean family. Now, I'll go and convince the old man to give you the Jean family, and you'll stop your actions. How about that? Uncle Chi felt that this was very good. He had followed Jean Kuan for many years and knew Jean Kuan's temper and personality very well. Now, Jean Kuan was already so sick. In the past month, if it wasn't for the fact that he couldn't see the Jean family fall in his hands, Jean Kuan would have been completely unable to hold on. Uncle Chi had been holding on to the Jean family's kill order for nearly 2 months, but he hadn't sent it out. It wasn't because he was soft-hearted or because of other reasons. It was just that after weighing the pros and cons, he realized that letting Jean Hauser take over the Jean family was the best outcome. Although he knew that this was the best outcome all these years, he had always been by the Jean family and Jean Kuan's side. His position was the same as Jean Kuan's in some respects. To Jean Hauser, such a big surprise was a great gift. Unfortunately, he didn't know much about Jean Hauser. He thought that Jean Hauser was with Jean Yi and the others. However, he didn't know that in Jean Hauser's heart, nothing could compare to his determination to destroy the Jean family. Jean Hauser narrowed his eyes and looked at Uncle Chi's face. Give me the Jean family? Yes. Are you sure? Of course. Uncle Chi still had a trace of pride in his heart. Isn't this your goal? Jean Hausa pursed his lips into a straight line. He looked straight at Uncle Chi, his eyes cold. He didn't say anything, but the look in his eyes was unbearable. Uncle Chi suddenly realized that something was wrong. No matter what, he was an old man who had been by Jean Kuen's side for a long time. How could he be shocked by the gaze of a junior? But in that instant, he actually felt a chill run down his spine. Jean Hausa didn't speak. Uncle Chi swallowed his saliva and tried his best to stabilize his tone. You should know what to do for such a good thing, right? Jean Hausa, who was sitting on the sofa, finally changed his posture. He snapped his fingers. Soon, someone came in. Throw it out. These 3 simple words caused Uncle Chi's eyes to widen. He couldn't believe that the face he had been proud of in front of Jean Kuen for half his life had disappeared just like that. Jean Hausa, do you know what you're doing? Uncle Chi's expression changed the moment his arm was lifted. Before he was dragged away, Jean Hausa finally got up. He walked in front of Uncle Chi extremely slowly and looked at Uncle Chi with sinister eyes. I've always known what I'm doing. It's you guys who don't know. I don't care about the Jean family. All I want is to destroy him. Looking at Uncle Chi's shocked eyes, he curled his lips coldly. After all, someone has to be buried with them for what happened back then. Don't you think so? Uncle Chi was really shocked this time. He widened his eyes and looked at Jean Hausa. He couldn't believe that Jean Hausa actually knew what happened back then. What nonsense are you talking about? What happened back then? He wanted to play dumb, but Jean Hausa didn't have the patience to accompany him. He waved his hand and said, throw it out. Uncle Chi, who had been by Jean Kuen's side for half his life, was thrown out just like that. Jean Hausa sat back on the sofa, and Tang Hua entered the door at this moment. He bent down. Boss, Jean Yi asked someone to pass a message that he wants to see you. Jean Yi? Jean Hausa narrowed his eyes and thought of some of Jean Yi's recent actions. He still had some ability, but compared to his determination, it wasn't enough. I won't see him. Jean Hausa stood up. Prepare the plane and fly to Lin City. Let 6th and 7th brother keep a close eye on the rest of the matters here. Yes. Tang Hua looked at Jean Hausa's expression and had the rare thought of joking with him. Do you want to see sister-in-law? It had been 2 months since Jean Hausa last returned to Lin City. Jean Hausa glared at Tang Hua. He didn't deny it, but his footsteps quickened. In the past 2 months, Shi Mengwan's life had been very smooth. After the French competition, the studio recruited 2 more newcomers. The newcomers' abilities weren't bad. After trying them out for more than 2 months, she realized that they were all promising talents. The design concept and ideas were also very compatible with her. The studio's business was booming, and she also began to get involved in work, making herself busy. Ever since that day, Jean Hausa never came to look for her again. She had dreamed of that man. She dreamed that he had secretly made the key to her house again and came to her house to see her. However, when she woke up, she realized that it was a dream. After she woke up, she even smelled Jean Hausa's aura in the room. This made her wonder if she was hallucinating. Fortunately, she never dreamed of Jean Hausa again after that day. This made her relax, but at the same time, she felt a little disappointed. It was impossible to forget, not for the rest of her life. Whether it was their first encounter when she was 12 years old or everything after their reunion. For Shi Mengwan, those were memories engraved in the depths of her heart and couldn't be forgotten. She was still thinking that perhaps she needed more time to force herself to forget everything. However, before she could give herself time to calm down, Mother Shi couldn't sit still anymore. Ever since she saw Jean Hausa last time, Mother Shi had been worried. She originally thought that Shi Mengwan was a child who knew her limits, but she never expected that she would actually have something to do with someone who had a fiancé. This wasn't something Mother Shi could tolerate. After thinking about it, she felt that she had cared too little about Shi Mengwan. So when she returned home, she thought about it carefully and felt that she still had to let Shi Mengwan go on a blind date. The people she knew outside were so unreliable. But a blind date was different. The people she met on a blind date were, firstly, they knew each other well, and secondly, as a mother, she could help check them out. What could be more suitable and ideal than this? After thinking it through, Mother Shi took Shi Mengwan's matter to heart. The unlucky one was Shi Mengwan. Her mother arranged blind dates every 2 or 3 days. As for the blind dates, most of them were from the town. Other than the town, there were also some distant relatives who were far away and had no relationship with Shi Mengwan. When they heard that Mother Shi was looking for someone to go on a blind date with Shi Mengwan, they introduced them. From the town, from the county, and from Lin City. Shi Mengwan was extremely annoyed, but she couldn't refuse. As soon as she refused, Mother Shi asked, "Are you still unable to forget that guy surnamed Jean?" As soon as these words came over, in order to prove that she had forgotten about that guy surnamed Jean, Shi Mengwan had been on many blind dates during this period of time. That afternoon, she was just about to ask Xiao Ji to order takeout. Her phone rang. It was still Mother Shi. Without exception, it was about her blind date again. First, she talked about the man's conditions, then how good he was. Of course, all the blind dates, without exception, were able to accept marrying into the family. They were willing to be a live-in son-in-law, and the child they gave birth to would be surnamed Shi. Sometimes, Shi Mengwan couldn't help but admire her. Where did her mother find so many people who were willing to agree to her family's conditions? Or could it be that men nowadays had already settled for the next best thing? She heard that the ratio of men to women was out of balance. In 2 years, there would be at least 30 million bachelors. In the past, Shi Mengwan didn't believe it, but now that she thought about it, it might really be true. After all, if it weren't for the fact that so many men couldn't get a wife, how could they casually agree to such conditions? She sighed in her heart and finally hung up the phone. However, not long after, her phone rang again. Shi Mengwan was already weak. "Hey, what's wrong?" "Hello, Mom." Afraid that Mother Shi would miss her for a long time again, she spoke first. "I understand. Don't remind me anymore. Tonight at 7 p.m., Starlight Cafe. Don't worry, since I promised you, I will naturally go." However, the person on the other end of the phone was a familiar voice to Shi Mengwan. "Mengwan, are you going on a blind date?" Shi Mengwan was stunned for a moment. Only then did she realize that she had hung up the phone without looking at the caller ID. "Wan Xianyang? It's me." Wan Xianyang's voice sounded a little mischievous. "Mengwan is going on a blind date, but she actually didn't consider me. It really makes me sad." Wan Xianyang. Shi Mengwan really couldn't respond to this. "You just cancel your blind date tonight. With me around, what blind date do you need?" "How?" "That was arranged by my mother." "Do you have Auntie's phone number? Do you need me to call her personally to explain?" Wan Xianyang, stop fooling around. How could Shi Mengwan dare to let him contact Mother Shi? It wouldn't be good if there was a misunderstanding. "I'm not fooling around. I'm serious." Wan Xianyang. Shi Mengwan had a headache. "Don't cause trouble. I'll solve it myself." Using the excuse that she was going to eat, Shi Mengwan sent Wan Xianyang away. After hanging up the phone, Shi Mengwan was in a daze for a long time. What she liked didn't like her. What she liked didn't like her. It really was. Shi Mengwan thought about it and didn't continue to take this matter to heart. Right now, she had received another order, and the other party specifically asked her to design it. So she busied herself again. When it was time to get off work, Shi Mengwan, who didn't want to give up, decided to go to Starlight Cafe. Little Ji, Little Chiu, and the others hadn't gotten off work yet. When they saw Shi Mengwan's fearless expression, they were a little amused. It was a secret of the whole studio that Shi Mengwan was forced to go on a blind date. After all, Mother Shi had specially come to the studio before she left last time. Firstly, he wanted to see his daughter's working environment and thank these people for taking care of her. Secondly, he was here to see if there were any suitable candidates for his daughter. Later on, he would call from time to time to arrange blind dates. If Shi Mengwan didn't pick up the phone, someone would pick it up for her. In this way, the entire studio knew about it. Their expressions of watching a good show provoked Shi Mengwan. She gritted her teeth and glared at those people. If you guys keep laughing, you won't get your bonus this month. Xiao Ji and the others didn't dare to laugh. Shi Mengwan finally felt much better. However, he still had no choice but to go to Starlight Cafe. It was said that the location of the blind date was arranged by the blind date. It was quite close to Shi Mengwan's studio. Even if Shi Mengwan was unwilling, she had to admit it. The person arranged by Mother Shi was quite reliable. There were very few weirdos like what they said on the internet. That was true. After Shi Mengwan saw Zhan Haoze, she became paranoid. Although there were quite a few men, they all wanted to dig up the 18 generations of each other's ancestors. Under such circumstances, the blind dates that appeared in front of Shi Mengwan were really acceptable. After entering the door, Shi Mengwan's gaze subconsciously searched for her, who she didn't know was the 18th or 19th blind date. Before she came, Shi Mengwan had already sent the photo to her phone. She hadn't had the time to look at it. Now, she took out her phone and took a look. The bespectacled man looked gentle and cultured. He wasn't her type. Now that he was here, she had to meet him. Looking around, she didn't find her blind date. Shi Mengwan picked up a seat and sat down. She picked up her phone and scrolled through Weibo. There was one hot topic today, and it was asking about the weirdo blind dates you've met. Shi Mengwan casually glanced at it and looked at the variety of weirdo men on it. She agreed with Mother Shi's taste a lot. To be honest, if it weren't for the fact that she couldn't forget about Zhan Haoze, she would have randomly picked one of the blind dates that Shi Mengwan had chosen. It wouldn't have been too bad. However, today's blind date didn't appear for a long time. Shi Mengwan looked at the time. It had already been 10 minutes since 7 o'clock, but the blind date hadn't arrived yet. This had never happened before. Could something have happened on the way? Shi Mengwan didn't want to think so, but she still had to think of calling to contact him. However, before she could get through, someone had already sat down opposite her. Mengwan. Wan Xianyang was holding a large bouquet of roses in his hand. Looking at Shi Mengwan's surprised face, he smiled brightly. Long time no see. Shi Mengwan wasn't in a hurry to take the flowers that Wan Xianyang handed over. She didn't get through, so she was still thinking about continuing. If you want to call your blind date with the surname Chen, you don't have to. Wan Xianyang reminded her very kindly, I've already talked to him just now. After he heard that I'm your boyfriend, he was very generous and said that he wished us happiness. Shi Mengwan didn't know what expression she was going to put on anymore. Looking at Wan Xianyang, she sighed in her heart. Wan Xianyang, actually, you don't have to do this. I can handle it. Wan Xianyang frowned. Do you think I'm trying to help you get rid of your blind date? Isn't it? Of course not. Wan Xianyang stood up angrily, then quickly sat down again. He put the bouquet of flowers aside and looked at Shi Mengwan's face very seriously. I'm serious. Since you want to go on a blind date, why didn't you consider me? Would I be worse than those blind dates? Stop fooling around. It was that bespectacled man just now. He didn't even do anything. He just shook his fist, and the other party retreated. How could such a man be worthy of Wan? I didn't mean that. Then what did you mean? Wan Xianyang originally didn't plan to meet Shi Mengwan this time. After all, he could only stay in Lin City for 2 days this time, and there were still many things he hadn't done. However, he originally wanted to make a call to make his presence known in front of Shi Mengwan, but he didn't expect to hear about Edith, which she was going on a blind date. We're not suitable. What's not suitable? Wan Xianying didn't understand. You're talking about family background. My family isn't the kind of family that looks after their disciples. Our Wan family also has a precedent of marriage alliances with small families. You're talking about feelings. I'm sincere to you. Isn't that better than those blind dates that we've only met a few times? Besides, even if you feel that you won't have a partner when you marry to Rome City and are unwilling, don't you still have sister-in-law? Hua Jinyao and I are childhood friends. If you really get together with me, won't you be able to keep sister-in-law company? I really can't think of how I'm not as good as those blind dates of yours. Ever since they met, Wan Xianying had always been gentle and polite. His humor didn't hide his utilitarian nature as a businessman. However, it was the first time Shi Mengwan had seen Wan Xianying say such a long string of words in one breath. She shifted her gaze slightly and looked at the bouquet of red roses. Because you'll never be able to meet my conditions. What do you mean? Wan Xianying didn't quite understand. On one hand, Shi Mengwan really wanted him to give up, and on the other hand, she was also very serious about her conditions. My mother and my father only had 2 daughters, me and my sister. And I promised my parents that if I want to get married in the future, I'll find a son-in-law. Son-in-law? Wan Xianying's expression was a little strange. What do you mean? That's right. Our family wants our son-in-law to marry into our family. The child we give birth to will have my surname. Shi Mengwan's words were especially firm. This time, Wan Xianying wasn't in a hurry to speak. He sat on the chair, as if he didn't expect Shi Mengwan to say such a thing. Are you joking with me? No. Shi Mengwan shook her head. I'm serious. Seeing that Wan Xianying still hadn't reacted, she said very softly, Wan Xianying, don't waste time on me. I know your identity very well, so I know that your family won't let you be a son-in-law, and it's even more impossible for the child you give birth to have my surname. Since you know it's impossible, why are you so obsessed with me? Shi Mengwan hadn't specially inquired about Wan Xianying's family background, but there were some things that she didn't need to inquire about to know. Hua Jinyao's childhood friend had quite an impressive family background. The antique shop under his name was almost making a lot of money every day. He had a family background, and he had an external appearance. How could such a man agree to marry into the family? Shi Mengwan said all she had to say. She took advantage of Wan Xianying's daze to stand up. She said that she was going to the bathroom, but she was actually giving Wan Xianying time to digest her words. She believed that Wan Xianying understood and might leave later. She went into the bathroom and washed her face to calm down. No matter what, today's blind date was avoided. After all, with Wan Xianying around, she didn't need to send away the previous blind date. However, she was happy too early. The water on her face hadn't dried yet when Mother Shi called. What's wrong with you? Are you with that Jean guy again? Why did I hear that you didn't go on a blind date properly, but got someone to chase that person away? Mom, it's nothing like that. If it's not Jean, then who is it? Wan, don't tell me you didn't want to go on a blind date, so you found a random man to brush me off? I didn't, Mom. Shi Mengwan felt that sometimes she really couldn't talk to Mother Shi. While she was still thinking about how to explain, she kept walking forward. She walked a little too fast and didn't notice that there was someone in front of her. The moment her body bumped into someone, the phone in her palm almost flew out. When the phone left her palm, Shi Mengwan wanted to grab it, but the person was one step ahead of her. He caught the phone and placed it in her hand. Shi Mengwan stood there and subconsciously pinched it, but she couldn't care less about listening to Mother Shi's words. She just stared blankly at the person in front of her. The two of them hadn't seen each other for almost 2 months. The man in front of her was still tall, but his expression was tired. He had also lost a lot of weight. At this moment, he was looking at her. His eyes were curved, and he seemed to be full of gentleness. Shi Mengwan was shocked by his gaze. She even forgot that Mother Shi was still talking on the other end of the phone. It wasn't until Mother Shi roared again that she casually said that she had something to do and hung up the phone. Just as she hung up the phone, her body was pulled into the arms of the man in front of her. He hugged her a little hard, but he restrained himself from hurting her. He gently rubbed his chin against the top of her hair. Shi Mengwan's body stiffened. She didn't expect Zhan Haoze to appear in front of her again. Wan. She heard his voice. I miss you so much. It was a gentle voice without a trace of hostility. Accompanied by his hug, he revealed his intentions in such a simple manner. Shi Mengwan couldn't move for a moment. She thought that it might be because she had suppressed herself too much for the past 2 months, so she was hallucinating. Otherwise, why would she see Zhan Haoze in broad daylight? It was one thing to see Zhan Haoze, but to see such a gentle Zhan Haoze. She wanted to speak. Her lips moved, but she didn't know what to say. Zhan Haoze gently tightened his arms and hugged her waist. He used half of his strength to pull her body closer to him. Wan, I miss you so much. He said it again. The weather in Lin City was getting colder, but it wasn't cold. The man was wearing a shirt and no tie. The temperature of his chest was burning her face. She couldn't help but raise her head to look at him. He was also looking at her. The moment their eyes met, he lowered his head and accurately kissed her lips. At that moment, Shi Mengwan seemed to see fireworks exploding in the sky. Chapter 693. Like and love couldn't be restrained. No matter how hard you tried, when you liked someone, you couldn't hide your eyes or your expression. No matter how much homework you did and how much psychological preparation you had, it was useless. That low voice of, I miss you, made Shi Mengwan lose all her armor. She had thought many times that she might meet him again, but she didn't expect to meet him like this. She thought that 2 months was enough for her to do psychological preparation, enough for her to forget the person in front of her, and then she could return to her usual indifference. But when she really met him, she realized that her heartstrings were pulled and she couldn't control them at all. Smelling the familiar scent on his body and feeling the warmth brought by their lips and teeth, for a moment, she couldn't extricate herself. The dizziness only lasted for a moment. Shi Mengwan heard footsteps in the distance. She suddenly came back to her senses and pushed Zhan Haoze away forcefully. She took a big step back. Because she retreated too quickly, Shi Mengwan's back hit the wall behind her. She felt a little pain, so she stabilized her body and stared at the man in front of her. Her gaze was very complicated. She lowered her eyes, and after a few breaths, the trace of charm just now completely dissipated. When she looked up again, Shi Mengwan's eyes were filled with rationality and not a trace of emotion. An uncontrollable kiss was already the limit she could give. She couldn't do or afford to give more. She looked at Zhan Haoze warily and turned around to leave. However, Zhan Haoze blocked in front of her. Wan? Didn't she like him just now? Zhan Haoze, we've already broken up. Shi Mengwan said this very calmly. Zhan Haoze's eyes darkened. Wan, I didn't agree. That's your business. I thought we had already reached a tacit understanding. Wan? Sorry, I won't be entangled with a man who has a fiancé. Shi Mengwan's attitude was firm. Zhan Haoze went forward to stop her, but his phone rang just now. The number on it made him have no choice but to answer the call first. It was at this moment that Shi Mengwan left the corridor. When Zhan Haoze hung up the phone and walked out, he couldn't see Shi Mengwan anymore. Of course, Wan Xianyang also disappeared. Shi Mengwan sat in her car and looked at Wan Xianyang, who got into the car uninvited. She felt a little helpless. She thought she had made herself clear. In fact, the 2-year agreement that Shi Mengwan mentioned at that time was indeed to shut Grandma Shi's mouth and stop her from having the idea of letting her parents adopt a child. But the other reason was that she wasn't sure how far she could go with Zhan Haoze. Before that, she didn't want to get married, nor did she want to fall in love. He could use this as an excuse to avoid a lot of trouble. However, she didn't expect her mother to be so capable. Not only was she not repelled by her excuses and reasons, but she also found suitable men to go on blind dates with her again and again. On this point, she was really convinced. The car stopped at her apartment, and she looked at Wan Xianying helplessly. She had just said that she was not feeling well and wanted to go home to rest. Wan Xianying suggested that he send her home, no matter how she refused. When she reached the parking lot, he took her car keys and got in the car. "Since you're not feeling well, let me drive." He knew that this was just her excuse, but Shi Mengwan really couldn't kick him out of the driver's seat. "I'm already home." As Shi Mengwan spoke, she reached out her hand to Wan Xianying, gesturing for him to get out of the car and return the car keys to her. Wan Xianying got out of the car, but he didn't return the car keys to her. He was also very tall, and he just stood in front of the car and looked at Shi Mengwan. "That marrying into the family was something you deliberately made to make things difficult for me, right? What era was it now? Who would make such a request?" Shi Mengwan's expression didn't change. She was very clear about Wan Xianying's family background. He was Hua Jinyao's childhood friend, so he probably wouldn't be too bad. "No. I'm serious." Wan Xianying looked at her, seemingly a little conflicted. Seriously speaking, putting aside the one or two illegitimate children his old man had accidentally created outside. His mother only gave birth to him. He didn't even have a sister or brother, so he had a very good relationship with Hua Jinyao and the others. Shi Mengwan's condition really stumped him. Even if he was willing, his parents wouldn't agree. Wan Xianying had a headache now. Even if this was indeed Shi Mengwan's condition to make things difficult for him, he couldn't do it. "Mengwan, what do you think? Let's each take a step back." Shi Mengwan looked at him, not understanding what he meant by taking a step back. "If you're willing to agree to be with me, we can have 2 children. One will take your surname, and the other will take my surname. How about that?" Shi Mengwan looked at Wan Xianying. At a certain moment, she was really touched. With Wan Xianying's family background and status, to be able to say such words was already a lot of sincerity. "Wan Xianying, thank you." Shi Mengwan thanked him sincerely. "Thank you so much." She didn't say more, but what else did Wan Xianying not understand? "Yes, thank me, but you can't accept me. Right?" "Wan Xianying, Mengwan, tell me the truth." Wan Xianying thought of what he had seen in France and some of the things that happened later. "Do you have someone in your heart?" Shi Mengwan was stunned for a moment. When she met Wan Xianying's clear eyes, she hesitated for a second and quickly nodded. "Yes. I have someone I like." Wan Xianying looked as if he had expected it. No wonder. The atmosphere was a little silent. Shi Mengwan didn't know what she could say. She stood there, feeling a little awkward. "It's fine." Wan Xianying was much calmer than her. "I saw it a long time ago." Shi Mengwan's expression was strange. Wan Xianying smiled softly. "If you don't have someone you like, why can't you see an outstanding man like me? Don't you think so?" His words made the expression on Shi Mengwan's face relax a little. She chuckled. "Because I'm blind." When she smiled, Wan Xianying also relaxed. There were some things that he didn't say after seeing through, but if he really said it, it would be better. "All right. Then I hope you won't be blind for too long," Wan Xianying continued. "Otherwise, the fake blind will become really blind." After rejecting Shi Mengwan's suggestion to send him back, Wan Xianying walked out of the neighborhood and left. Shi Mengwan looked at his back view, and the corners of her lips pursed into a straight line again. After being entangled with Zhang Haoze for such a long time, she couldn't break it off, and it was still messy. After going back and forth so many times, wasn't she just blind? It was just that she didn't feel like she could control her heart. Moreover, her feelings for Jean Hauser weren't as simple as just being attracted to him. After more than a year of relying on each other, she had never forgotten the care and companionship she had once had. She shook her head and didn't let herself think of Jean Hauser again. No matter how difficult some things were, she had to learn to let go. Shi Mengwan didn't see Jean Hauser come looking for her that night, which made her feel relieved again. Her personality could be considered flamboyant, and her willpower could definitely be considered firm. However, all her rationality would become vulnerable in front of Jean Hauser. Perhaps, she needed to stay away for a while. Why not fly to Rome City for a few days after she was done with this job? Not only could she accompany Su Qingsang, but she could also avoid Jean Hauser. Shi Mengwan had a good idea, but she didn't expect to see Jean Hauser guarding the door the next morning when she opened the door to go to work. Seeing that it was him, Shi Mengwan subconsciously took a step back, but when she thought that she had to go to work, she took another step forward. This step back and forward allowed her to stand in front of Jean Hauser. His tall stature made the entire door look extremely cramped. He also successfully blocked Shi Mengwan's way out. Jean Hauser, please move aside. I want to go out. I bought you breakfast. Jean Hauser acted as if he didn't see her cold face. You probably haven't had breakfast yet. Go to school after you eat. Shi Mengwan stared at the bag in Jean Hauser's hand. The logo on it was a very famous Hong Kong-style breakfast restaurant in Lin City. Retracting her gaze, Shi Mengwan's hand clenched the bag tightly. No need, thank you. I've eaten. Please move aside. His stiff tone was an obvious rejection, but in Jean Hauser's eyes, such a rejection wasn't thorough enough. He suddenly moved his face closer to Shi Mengwan. His sudden action startled Shi Mengwan, and her body naturally took a step back. Jean Hauser used the hand that wasn't carrying breakfast to place on her waist to stabilize her body. At the same time, he continued to move forward in front of her. The tip of his nose gently swept past her lips, and finally, he hugged her waist and took a step forward. The two of them stood together in the room. Jean Hauser hooked the tip of his foot and easily closed the door. Let's have breakfast. He raised the bag in his hand. Jean Hauser. Shi Mengwan pulled his hand away and said angrily, I've eaten. You've eaten? Are you sure? There's nothing to be uncertain about. Jean Hauser faced her and bent down again. Your mouth is full of the smell of toothpaste, but there's no taste of breakfast. He said such frivolous words with a serious expression, which made Shi Mengwan's face turn red. She bit her lip and pursed her lips tightly. After realizing what she had done, she loosened her grip a little. Jean Hauser, are you all right? Even if I haven't eaten, what does it have to do with you? I can go to the studio to eat. Can you move aside now? Jean Hauser didn't move aside. He grabbed her hand and led her to the dining table. He was much stronger than her. Shi Mengwan tried a few times, but she couldn't break free. She could only let him pull her away. Jean Hauser placed the bag in his hand on the table, opened it, and took out several lunch boxes from inside. He placed them out one by one. Let's eat. Shi Mengwan was finally able to break free from his hand when he placed the lunch boxes. She took a step back and stood about a meter away from Jean Hauser. Jean Hauser, we've already broken up. If he didn't hear it clearly yesterday, she didn't mind saying it again today. Jean Hauser turned around and faced the coldness in her eyes. He took a step forward and stood in front of her. I didn't agree. I don't need your consent. She had already decided and wouldn't change it. Wan, do you have to do this? Jean Hauser, do you have to do this? Shi Mengwan had a headache. She was really trying hard to control herself, and she was also trying hard to forget him. Why did he still have to appear? You go. Shi Mengwan took a step back and pointed in the direction of the door. She didn't want this. She didn't like him coming and going as he pleased. If he couldn't afford the feeling she wanted, then he shouldn't provoke her anymore. Jean Hauser's brows furrowed tightly. Wan, he wanted to explain himself, but his phone rang again. He glanced at Shi Mengwan and picked up the phone. The news from the other end of the phone made his expression change. He glanced at Shi Mengwan with a serious expression. "I'll be right there." After hanging up the phone, he put away his phone and looked at Shi Mengwan. "I have something urgent to deal with. I have to go out now. No matter how unhappy you are, you still have to eat breakfast." After saying this, he resisted the urge to hug Shi Mengwan. Instead, he left in a hurry. Shi Mengwan looked at his back and felt the seriousness in his words just now. Although he hadn't appeared during this period of time, he had obviously lost some weight today. Zhang Hao's footsteps were a little fast, so fast that Shi Mengwan didn't even have time to ask him what had happened. However, her intuition told her that this matter wasn't ordinary. When the car stopped at the entrance of the first hospital, Tang Hua had already come out. When he saw Zhang Hao, he walked in front of him in a few steps. The car accident happened an hour ago. At that time, Miss Chen was about to go to work. Just as she was about to reach the Chen Corporation's building, a car rushed out from the corner and hit Miss Chen's car. Tang Hua said very clearly, "I've already called the police, and the car that caused the accident has been detained, but I think it's not ordinary." He didn't say the rest, but the meaning was quite clear. This accident wasn't an accident, but man-made. Zhang Hao didn't ask further and went straight into the hospital. When he went in, Chen Feifei was still being resuscitated. He couldn't ask how the doctor was doing. Not long after, Chen Yongchang also came. The moment he came for Zhang Hao. Without giving Zhang Hao a chance to speak, he directly waved his fist at him. However, before his fist could touch Zhang Hao had already taken a step back to avoid it. Chen Yongchang was very angry. He pointed his finger at Zhang Hao. "Ungrateful. You're ungrateful. I want you to take good care of Feifei. Is this how you take care of her? It's fine if you don't show up, but as soon as you show up, you sent Feifei to the hospital? Uncle, don't call me that. I can't afford it." Chen Yongchang was really angry. Zhang Hao couldn't refute it, and he didn't intend to defend himself. He had already asked Tang Hua to investigate why such a thing happened. The specific situation would have to wait for Tang Hua to finish investigating. However, he didn't wait for Tang Hua to give the results of the investigation. Zhang Hao's phone rang again. There were a few photos on the screen. One was of Chen Feifei getting into a car accident this morning, and another was of him and Chen Feifei together. There was also a photo of Chen Feifei alone. 3 photos and a sentence. "It's not over yet." Zhang Hao's heart skipped a beat. There was no need to wait for the results of the investigation. This was the work of the Zhang family. He had thought that Zhang Kun and Uncle Qi might retaliate, but he didn't expect that the other party would actually target Chen Feifei. No, he shouldn't be surprised. This was more like their style of doing things. Zhang Hao held his phone with a solemn expression. He turned around and was about to leave, but was stopped by Chen Yongchang. "Where are you going? Where else can you go? Let me tell you, I won't let this matter go just like that. You must give our Feifei an explanation." Zhang Hao was silent. He couldn't give him an explanation. The only thing he could do was to avenge Chen Feifei so that those blind people wouldn't come to his door to cause trouble. "Uncle, don't worry. I will give you an explanation." This time, Zhang Hao wasn't in a hurry to leave. He waited outside the resuscitation room for Chen Feifei to wake up. After the doctor rescued her, he told them that Chen Feifei was out of danger. Now, there was no problem for the time being. Zhang Hao heaved a sigh of relief. But he couldn't completely relax. Chen Feifei's injuries weren't serious. She would be fine after a few days of rest. In his opinion, this didn't seem like they were deliberately trying to kill Chen Feifei. Instead, it seemed like they were giving him a warning. Realizing this, Zhang Hao suddenly had a bad premonition. Soon, he received a new text message on his phone. Do you feel relieved? Jean Hauser, don't be happy too early. Do you think that just because you found a shield, we won't know who you really want to protect? Jean Hauser's heart skipped a beat. He almost immediately thought of Shi Mengwan. With this thought, he couldn't sit still anymore. He didn't care how long it would take for Chen Feifei to wake up. He hurriedly turned around to look for Shi Mengwan. Nothing could happen to Shi Mengwan. Along the way, he kept urging the driver to drive faster. A little faster. His phone didn't ring again, but this kind of moment was even more torturous. His hand on his knee clenched tightly into a fist. He was still careless. He should have been more reliable. Shi Mengwan didn't eat the breakfast prepared by Jean Hauser. But she really wasn't a wasteful person. After thinking about it, she brought breakfast to the company and directly distributed it to the other people in the studio. But even so, she still felt that it wasn't enough. There was a ball of fire in her heart. That ball of fire made her want to burn Jean Hauser regardless of anything else. She was still thinking about how she should face Jean Hauser the next time he came, or whether she should use a more intense method. No matter what, she couldn't continue like this. Just as she made up her mind, she forced herself to divert her attention and stop thinking about Jean Hauser. On the other end, Jean Hauser suddenly rushed into her office. Wan Shaoji followed behind Jean Hauser and looked at her helplessly. Her expression was slightly conflicted. Sister Shi, I can't stop him. Jean Hauser heaved a sigh of relief when he saw that Shi Mengwan was safe and sound. He went forward to hug her. He needed to confirm her safety, but Shi Mengwan suddenly raised her hand and placed it on his chest. Anger gradually appeared on her face again. Chapter 694. Shi Mengwan refused to be entangled like this. She needed to forget Jean Hauser in the shortest time possible, and not let him appear in front of her again and again. However, Jean Hauser acted as if he didn't notice the ugly expression on her face. He suddenly reached out and held her in his arms. Shi Mengwan was stunned for a moment. She wanted to push him away, but he hugged her very tightly. Jean Hauser's chin touched the top of Shi Mengwan's hair. Smelling the fragrance of her hair, he felt his mood slowly calm down. He tightened his grip on her waist. The feeling of worrying that something would happen to her made him lose his mind for a moment. Shi Mengwan didn't let him hug her for too long. She suddenly raised her elbow and slammed it hard into his chest. Jean Hauser wasn't prepared for her to attack him. He took 2 steps back and let go of her at the same time. Shi Mengwan took a deep breath. Her willpower really wasn't strong. Especially every time she encountered something related to Jean Hauser. But this didn't mean that she was someone without a bottom line or principles. On the contrary, it was precisely because she had principles and bottom lines that she couldn't accept Jean Hauser's actions. Jean Hauser. Do you have to do this? Did he have to use such a method to constantly get close to her and shake her willpower? Wan. Jean Hauser thought about Chen Feifei's car accident, and his brows furrowed tightly. Those explanations weren't easy to say, and he didn't want her to know about those worries. However, looking at Shi Mengwan's clueless expression, he hesitated again. He didn't speak, and Shi Mengwan didn't know what she could say, so she also remained silent. In the silence, the two of them faced each other. After a few minutes, Shi Mengwan finally couldn't stand the situation in front of her. She didn't want to speak anymore, nor did she look at Jean Hauser. She turned around and returned to her seat. She still had an order to finish. She wanted to finish it quickly so that she could go to Rong City to see Su Qingsang. Although she didn't lack people to take care of her now, and she was a doctor in the obstetrics and gynecology department, she still wanted to see her with her own eyes and make sure that she was safe. Just as her hand touched the mouse, Jean Hauser walked in front of her. He held her hand, making it impossible for her to continue for a while. Jean Hauser. Even if he was crazy, he should have had enough, right? Come with me to Qingcheng. He wanted to go to Qing City to personally solve the problems of the Zhan family. Before that, he had to put her in front of him, under his eyes, before he could feel at ease. Shi Mengwan blinked. For a moment, she thought that the man in front of her was possessed. What did you say? Come with me to Qingcheng. As if he was afraid that Shi Mengwan didn't understand, he didn't mind explaining more clearly. My father is from Qing City. My home is also in Qingcheng. I want to take you back. Shi Mengwan looked at his hand that was holding hers and chuckled. You mean, bring my parents? Zhan Haoze frowned. He didn't mean that. In his heart, no one in the Zhan family was qualified to be the head of the family. You don't need to see them. In Zhan Haoze's heart, they were just a group of unimportant people. In fact, between him and Zhan Kuan, it was a matter of life and death. Shi Mengwan misunderstood his meaning. She couldn't tell what she was thinking. The only thing she could be sure of was that Zhan Haoze had never thought of bringing her to meet his family. Zhan Haoze, you should go. I won't go to Qing City with you. She had heard from Shi Mengwan that Zhan Haoze's father had married another woman and had a stepmother. She reckoned that it wasn't just a stepmother. The stepmother might have her own children. Under such circumstances, Zhan Haoze's relationship with his family was definitely not good. She wouldn't really ask to see his family. However, Zhan Haoze's words just now made her feel a little uncomfortable. Since he didn't want to bring her to Qing City to meet his family, why did he say that he wanted to bring her to Qing City? She pulled her hand back from Zhan Haoze's hand. The wariness on Shi Mengwan's face was even more obvious than before. Wan, the expression on Zhan Haoze's face became more and more conflicted. He wanted to mention it more or less, but he didn't know where to start. I still have something to do. If there's nothing else, President Zhan, please leave. As she spoke, she focused her attention on the screen in front of her again. Zhan Haoze was about to say something when his phone rang again. It was Tang Hua. He brought 2 pieces of news. Those 2 pieces of news made Zhan Haoze's expression change slightly. After hanging up the phone, he looked at Shi Mengwan. She was staring at the screen intently. The mouse on her hand clicked a few times, as if she wasn't affected by him at all. Zhan Haoze couldn't say the rest of his words. Wan, I might be busy for a while. When I'm done, I'll come pick you up and take you to Qing City. No need. Shi Mengwan didn't even raise her head. I'm not interested. Her cold tone was full of resistance. Zhan Haoze was helpless. Moreover, it was indeed a troubled time. He could only leave first. Wan, wait for me. I'll definitely come pick you up. At that time, if everything was settled, it would be easier to pick her up and take her to Qing City. Shi Mengwan acted as if she didn't hear him and was still focused on the work at hand. However, after Zhan Haoze left, she put down the mouse and looked at an unknown point in the distance. No one knew what she was thinking. Zhan Haoze left the office building. Tang Hua had already parked the car downstairs. He quickly got into the car. Tang Hua looked a little anxious. Boss, what do you think we should do about this? That old fart, Zhan Kuan, actually issued a kill order for boss. Even though such a kill order was only issued within the Zhan family. But what kind of family was the Zhan family? In the early years, they relied on doing some unorthodox businesses to bring the Zhan family to its current state. The Zhan family had their own assassin hall. They might not be comparable to the top professional assassins in the world, but they were still quite powerful. All these years, Zhan Kuan had used this assassin hall to get rid of many of his thorns. Now, Zhan Kuan had actually used such a kill order on him. It wasn't a warning, nor was it a warning. He really wanted his life. Zhan Haoze's expression had a rare trace of seriousness. Previously, he thought that Chen Feifei's injury was a warning to him, but now that he thought about it, it wasn't. Thinking back to what Uncle Qi said when he came looking for him last time, he seemed to understand a little. Whether it was the second or third generation of the Zhan family, they didn't have a worthy successor. Jean Kun was already old. It wouldn't be that easy for the Jean family to continue the glory of the past few decades. Uncle Chi was probably behind Jean Kun's back and wanted him to take up the mantle of the Jean family. However, he didn't know that his hatred for the Jean family and Jean Kun had already been carved into his bones. No matter what the Jean family did, he remained unmoved. Boss? He didn't say anything. Tang Hua was a little worried. Go back to Qing City. Jean Hausa quickly made a decision within a few seconds. Tang Hua wasn't surprised. But if we leave, what about Qin Feifei? Actually, he wanted to ask, what about Shi Mengwan? The people from the Jean family were just flustered for a moment. They weren't stupid. When they reacted, they would definitely understand that Qin Feifei was just a shield. She was useless at all. Jean Hausa narrowed his eyes as if he had thought of something. Let's go. We'll go to the hospital before returning to Qing City. No matter what, Qin Feifei's injury this time was because of him. After all, the Qin family had saved his life. He still had to give them an explanation. The weather in Qing City had already started to turn cold. Jean Hausa sat in the car and watched as the driver shook off the tail behind him for the 13th time. He glanced at the traffic behind him. Hua, how's the old man doing recently? He's still hanging on by a thread. He had already suffered 2 strokes, and this stroke had brought about quite serious consequences. However, Jean Kun was lucky. He didn't die even though he was like this. He still had time to deal with Jean Hausa. It was really because his previous movements were too light. Tell old 6 and old 7 to move faster. Although this was a little forceful, he had no other choice at this time. Tang Hua nodded in understanding. Okay, I believe that 6th and 7th brothers will arrange it well. Hopefully. Jean Hausa hoped so, but he couldn't really let down his guard completely. In fact, the Jean family had been operating in Qing City for decades. Their power was deeply rooted, and it really wasn't something that could be completely destroyed in a short period of time. He had underestimated his enemy before. But no matter what, he wouldn't stop, even if this process was more difficult than he had thought. Jean Hausa narrowed his eyes, his expression full of danger. Jean Kun was a very subjective and very assertive person. In his heart, if there was someone who didn't do what he wanted, then it must be someone else's fault, not his. He never reflected on his own problems, so naturally, he wouldn't feel that it was his fault that the son he had taught was now reduced to a housewife with a woman. This was that woman's fault, it was that woman's problem. She was the one who seduced his son, and she was the one who made Jean Lai become like this. Since Jean Kun had been in a shady business back then, he wasn't just ordinarily ruthless. When he knew that that woman had caused his son to become like this, he had the intention to kill her. Towards that woman. He had to get rid of her. But at first, he didn't find an opportunity to do so. Jean Lai's maternal family seemed to know something, and they were still very protective of this grandson and his grandson's child. He didn't have a chance to do so for a while, but it didn't mean that he would never have a chance to do so. He decided to wait for a while, wait for a suitable opportunity, and then get rid of that woman. At first, he didn't wait for an opportunity, which made him depressed. Later, he didn't even hesitate to bring Zhang Ji and Min Quan to his side, thinking of nurturing them for a period of time. But with Jean Lai in front of him, the other illegitimate children naturally couldn't satisfy Jean Kun. The more dissatisfied he was, the more he hated Jean Lai, hated Jean Lai's wife. Later, Jean Kun's opportunity finally came. Because of the change of power. Jean Lai's maternal family had encountered some trouble. He couldn't care less about Jean Lai for the time being. For Jean Kun, this was an opportunity. Previously, because he was worried about Jean Lai's maternal family, he didn't make a move. Now that something had happened to Jean Lai's maternal family, his opportunity had come. At this time, Jean Lai and his wife had already been living outside for several years. The family of 3 lived the most ordinary life in another city. Jean Cohen, who saw the investigation information again, was still extremely angry. Because after so many years, he hadn't picked out a child who could inherit his career. Jean Lai, who could inherit his career, was bewitched by a woman. He couldn't tolerate it. Jean Cohen decided to get rid of that woman. Before getting rid of her, he went to the door with the last trace of father-son relationship. In the beginning, Jean Cohen decided to be polite before using force. If Jean Lai was willing to go home with him obediently, then he could only kill that woman and let him bring that bastard home. But if Jean Lai didn't listen to him, then don't blame him for being impolite. When Jean Cohen came to the door, Jean Lai was naturally very surprised. He had no idea that his father had actually targeted him a few years ago. Jean Lai was still happy to see his father. But that happiness didn't last long. Jean Lai, you disappoint me too much. Ever since he was young, Jean Cohen, who had always been cold-blooded and indifferent, still put on such a face. Dad, don't call me. Jean Cohen was very angry. For a woman, where did you put the honor of the Jean family and our family? Jean Lai was silent. He had indeed let down Jean Cohen's nurturing. However, Dad, Ruoliu is a good woman. If you had really come into contact with her, you would definitely like her. Humph, impossible. It's true. Jean Lai was still too naive. At this time, he was still trying to convince Sher Cohen to accept his wife. Ruoliu is a very good woman. Dad, you really, shut up. Jean Cohen glared at his son in front of him, wishing he could strangle him to death. However, the purpose of his visit today wasn't to argue with his son. Jean Cohen's face was cold. He took out a gun and threw it in front of Jean Lai. Take it. Dad? Jean Cohen was shocked. He wasn't unfamiliar with guns, but after leaving the Jean family, he hadn't touched one for many years. You're my son. You can't be so cowardly, right? Jean Cohen sneered. Don't say that I, your father, didn't give you a chance. What do you mean, Dad? Pick it up. Jean Cohen shouted. Jean Lai hesitated for a moment, but in the end, he still picked up the gun. Dad? Kill her. As Jean Cohen spoke, he pointed at Xiao Ruoliu, who had just come down from upstairs and had just settled her bad boy. Dad? Jean Lai had been living too comfortably in the past few years. It was so comfortable that he had forgotten what the Jean family relied on to make their fortune. He looked at the gun in his hand, then at Jean Cohen. In the end, as if he was throwing a hot potato, he threw the gun out and threw it on the coffee table. Dad. Are you crazy? Jean Lai's expression was full of shock and accusation. I'll say. Jean Cohen looked at his useless child and pushed the gun to Jean Lai's side again. Didn't you say that you wanted to go back to the Jean family? Since that's the case, then kill this woman. If she dies, you can go back to the Jean family. Dad. If you say that, I won't go back to the Jean family for the rest of my life. Chapter 695. Jean Hauser woke up from his dream with a start. The gunshots seemed to still be lingering in his ears. His head hurt a little. He rubbed his temples, but he couldn't suppress the headache no matter what. Ever since he returned to Qingcheng, he couldn't restrain the nightmares from that day. Even if he wanted to resist, it would be useless. He got up and looked at the gloomy night sky outside. He took out his phone, unlocked it, and looked at Shi Mengwan's number on it. In the end, he didn't pull it out. At dawn, he woke up early and went to the gym downstairs to work out. He was used to getting up early. He had the habit of doing morning exercises every day. Not only morning exercises, but also boxing. The security of Sakura Manor was quite good. Moreover, he had arranged many people to guard this villa, both openly and secretly. When he came out of the gym, the staff had already prepared breakfast. He finished reading the financial news while eating breakfast. As soon as he put down the bowl in his hand, Tang Hua entered the door with a rare solemn expression. "Boss, something happened to sixth brother." Zhang Haoze looked at Tang Hua with a malicious expression. "What's going on? Speak clearly. Last time, you asked sixth brother to keep an eye on the club under the Zhang family's name. He seemed to have found a breakthrough. The day before yesterday, he told me that he wanted to go in and take a look. But until today, I haven't received any news from him." Tang Hua's face was a little anxious. This group of people had been together since they were young, so they were clear about their character. "Boss, old Six isn't someone who doesn't know what's important. If nothing had happened to him, no matter what, there would definitely be news. Now that there's been no news from him for an entire day, I'm afraid." Tang Hua didn't say it out loud, but he believed that Zhang Haoze would understand. Zhang Haoze was silent. He thought about Uncle Chi's words last time and the killing order. His expression was solemn. "Have you searched?" He knew about the clubhouse that Tang Hua was talking about. Previously, Old Six had said that he wanted to go and check it out. He knew that it wasn't going to be easy. He tried to stop Old Six, but he couldn't do so. "I've tried, but there's no news yet." Zhang Haoze's expression was solemn. He sat there with his brows tightly furrowed. The Zhang family couldn't be dealt with in a day. After such a long time, he had slowly laid out his plans and slowly closed the net. Ever since he decided to go against the Zhang family, he knew that this was a road full of thorns. No matter what, the Zhang family was a family that had been accumulated for so many years. It was impossible to destroy them overnight. He had this understanding. However, this understanding did not include sacrificing the lives of those he regarded as his closest friends. Let Old Seven take some people to find out where Old Six is and bring him back. But Tang Hua looked like he wanted to say something, but he hesitated. He didn't say what he didn't say, but Zhang Haoze understood what he meant. If Old Seven brought people there and didn't manage to bring Old Six out, he might end up getting himself killed instead. If that was the case, then it really wasn't a good thing. Zhang Haoze also realized that it was not appropriate to let seventh brother look for someone. Perhaps, he should directly find a breakthrough point from the Zhang family. His phone rang again. The person on the other end of the phone was Uncle Chi. "I think we can meet now." "I don't see any need to meet him." Zhang Haoze had a very bad impression of Uncle Chi, is that so? Uncle Chi smiled and said a name. Then he asked, "Are you sure you don't want to see me?" Zhang Haoze's expression was ugly. He gripped the phone in his palm tightly and resisted the urge to throw it out. 2 hours later, Zhang Haoze met Uncle Chi in the office of Qingqing Company. Uncle Chi's expression was much more smug than the last time he came. Zhang Haoze was expressionless. Even if he was in a weak position, he wouldn't admit defeat in front of the Zhang family. Uncle Chi wasn't in a hurry to speak. He slowly took out a few photos from his pocket and placed them on Zhang Haoze's desk. In the photo, a man who looked to be less than 30 years old was tied to a chair. The man's body was obviously injured, as if he had been beaten. No matter how calm Zhang Haoze was, his expression still changed slightly when he saw Old Six like this. But he quickly calmed down. He looked at Uncle Chi coldly. His slightly narrowed eyes were sinister and dangerous. Uncle Chi wasn't annoyed by his glare. He chuckled. "How about we discuss a condition now?" Zhang Haoze frowned. His expression was very cold. "I don't think there's anything to discuss between us." "Why do you say that?" "I don't believe you don't know what the current situation is." Zhang Haoze didn't answer him. Uncle Chi leaned forward slightly. "I can guarantee that you won't be able to eat the Zhang family in one go now. But if you're willing to take a step back, you can. Why don't you take a step back and we'll both be happy?" If possible, Uncle Chi really didn't want to beg a junior like this. But he had no choice. Zhang Yi, Zhang Li, Zhang Yang, and the others, ever since the last time, not only did they not unite as one, but they also caused more and more trouble. Jean Lai's ability wasn't bad, but the Jean family had a big business. He hadn't taken on all the responsibilities in the past. There were many things that he couldn't make decisions about. He really didn't have Jean Kuen's demeanor back then. If it wasn't for the fact that Uncle Chi really couldn't find anyone, he wouldn't have put down his old face and come here to beg Jean Hauser. Jean Hauser curled up the corners of his lips. Take a step back. How? How about you take over the Jean family and let the Jean family become yours? Are you sure you can make the decision? Jean Kuen isn't dead yet. He really called Jean Kuen's name. His expression was full of ridicule without the slightest bit of respect. Uncle Chi wasn't angry. I don't believe that you don't know what kind of situation the old man is in now. So now, I can make the decision. Uncle Chi had been by Jean Kuen's side for more than 30 years. In the Jean family, he had absolute authority. He was also confident that as long as he was around, those people wouldn't be able to cause any trouble. Jean Hauser was silent. He didn't respond to Uncle Chi's words. Uncle Chi wasn't in a hurry either. He was extremely patient today, waiting for Jean Hauser to compromise. Tang Hua, who was standing beside Jean Hauser, looked at his conflicted face. His lips moved, but he wanted to say something, but he stopped. As if sensing his subordinate's thoughts, Jean Hauser picked up the stack of photos and looked at the complacency and certainty on Uncle Chi's face. He tore off the photos one by one. I refuse. You, Uncle Chi, who hadn't expected such an answer, was stunned on the spot. He was stunned for nearly a minute. When Jean Hauser asked Tang Hua to chase him away, he suddenly placed his hands on the desk. Jean Hauser, are you sure? There's nothing to be uncertain about. Sixth brother's life wouldn't be in danger for the time being. Uncle Chi was afraid that he would use extreme measures, so he didn't dare to hurt sixth brother for the time being. And he was confident that he could bring sixth brother out. Don't you want Lu Tao's life anymore? Lu Tao was referring to sixth brother. He's just a subordinate, but if you dare to hurt him, I will repay the Jean family 10 times, 100 times. Jean Hauser wasn't afraid of Uncle Chi's threat. You can try. Really? Uncle Chi sneered and took out a few more photos from his pocket. Yes, you're amazing. You don't care about Lu Tao's life, so don't you care about her life? This time, it was a photo of Shi Mengwan on the desk. One of them was a photo of Shi Mengwan alone, while the second photo was of Jean Hauser and Shi Mengwan dancing on the dance floor together in France. Jean Hauser's gaze became sinister and dangerous. He almost couldn't help but stand up, but he quickly sat down again. If you dare to touch a single strand of her hair, do you believe that I will let you have a taste of what it's like to beg for death? Don't get agitated. Uncle Chi didn't care about his threat at all. If you're so agitated, we won't be able to calm down later, don't you think? Jean Hauser knew that he had lost control just now. He should have acted a little calmer. This kind of weakness being grasped in the hands of others made him feel very unhappy. What exactly do you want to do? Uncle Chi smiled. Stop all your revenge, go back to the Jean family, and support the overall situation. Jean Hauser's expression was rather ugly. Uncle Chi wasn't in a hurry. He had been by Jean Kuen's side for 30 years and had walked step by step to where he was now in the Jean family. He wasn't someone to be trifled with. What if I refuse? I think you don't have a choice. Uncle Chi didn't mind telling the truth. Yes, you can also refuse, but I can't guarantee the lives of Mr. Lu and Miss Shi. Looking at Jean Hauser's gloomy face, Uncle Chi chuckled. Of course, you can also tie me up now and use me, an old fellow, to exchange hostages with the Jean family. However, I'm already so old. If I really die, I won't have any regrets. If the two of them really die with me, it'll be worth it. Don't you think so? Jean Hauser stared at Uncle Chi's face. He didn't restrain his aura at all. That pressure made even an experienced person like Uncle Chi tremble slightly. However, the more Jean Hauser acted like this, the more determined Uncle Chi was to let him return to the Jean family. Only such a person could support the Jean family. The atmosphere in the office was rather silent. Jean Hausa sat there without moving. Tang Hua, who was behind him, listened to him completely. Naturally, he wouldn't disturb him at such a time. He didn't speak, and Uncle Chi wasn't in a hurry. He didn't expect Jean Hausa to agree immediately, but he was gambling. After all, he was the child of Jean Lai and Xiao Ruoliu. Jean Hausa was like Jean Kuan, but not like him. His methods were similar, but he was afraid that there was still a soft spot in his heart. And this soft spot was enough for Uncle Chi to make use of. 10 minutes later, Jean Hausa finally said, "Okay, I agree. But I have a few conditions." "Speak." "First, this old man is old. Since his health isn't good, don't come out all the time. Rest well." This was to separate Jean Kuan. Uncle Chi was a little hesitant, but in the end, he nodded. Anyway, he was Jean Kuan's spokesperson now. He would do what Jean Kuan instructed. As long as he kept an eye on it, no one would cause trouble in front of Jean Kuan. "Okay. Second, I'll take over the Jean family. I don't want to see the other Jean family members. This is a little difficult. After all, they all have their own duties now. For the time being, they won't hinder you. If you don't agree, there's nothing to talk about. I'm that person's grandson. If you provoke me, at most, we'll fight to the death." "Okay. I agree." In any case, it wasn't much use for those idiots to stay in the Jean family. It didn't matter if they stayed or not. "Third, let my people go. Also, you have to promise that you'll never touch my people. You're not allowed to hurt them." "No problem. Since you're willing to take over the Jean family, you're my master. Not only will I get people to revoke the kill order against you, but I can also get people to protect the people you care about." Protect? What did this protection mean? Jean Hausa couldn't be clearer. He looked at Uncle Chi coldly. "Give me a week. I'll arrange things and enter the company." "Okay. I'll wait for you for a week." Uncle Chi, who had received an affirmative answer, was very easy to talk to. "If you think a week isn't enough, more time is fine." Uncle Chi left. Jean Hausa sat on the chair and rubbed the space between his eyebrows. Tang Hua asked worriedly, "Boss?" Jean Hausa didn't look at him. He half closed his eyes and said softly, "Don't worry. I know what I'm doing." Shi Mengwan's life returned to peace. After that day, Jean Hausa never came to look for her again. In the blink of an eye, another month passed. Su Qingsang's stomach was already big. She wanted to fly to Rong City to see her a few times, but she had too many things to do. The studio recruited 2 newcomers and slowly got the hang of it. However, many clothes were requested to be mass-produced on Weibo. Of course, it wouldn't be lacking in anything. But it was still lacking a little something. If she wanted to make it big, she had to mass-produce it. Shi Mengwan understood this logic. In the following time, she went to a few factories and a few raw material manufacturers. She was so busy that she had no time to care about her own matters. Mother Shi had probably guessed something. Ever since the last blind date was ruined, she didn't mention asking her to go on a blind date again. This way, Shi Mengwan was much quieter. That day, she went to the last factory. It was already very late when she returned to the city. Although this section of the road had been repaired, there weren't many cars. Shi Mengwan drove halfway. She didn't know if it was because of stones or something else, but the car jolted. Shi Mengwan quickly reacted and gripped the steering wheel tightly. Finally, after stabilizing the car, she was about to continue driving. However, she realized that the car seemed to have broken down or something. It actually didn't move. She tried to start the car a few times but couldn't. After that, she quickly got out of the car to see what was wrong. If it didn't work, she could only call for a tow truck. Shi Mengwan got out of the car and opened the front cover. She didn't know much about the problem with the car. She only did this to see how to solve it. It was already late. She was alone in this place where there was no village or shop. Just thinking about it made her a little scared. She propped up the front cover of the car and checked it with the light of her phone. With her level, she couldn't find anything wrong with her car. After checking for a long time, Shi Mengwan really couldn't tell. Just as she was about to call for a tow truck, a voice came from behind her. "Miss, the car is broken. Do you want me to take a look at it for you?" Shi Mengwan was startled by the sudden sound. She turned around and saw a few young men in their early 20s surrounding her at some point in time. The one who spoke was a man in the lead. He was wearing a black jacket. He also seemed to think that he was handsome and shook his head. "Miss, come, let us examine you." Shi Mengwan swallowed her saliva. The situation in front of her didn't seem to be very good. "No need, I've already called for a tow truck." She held her phone and wanted to call the police without leaving a trace. However, the man in the lead took her phone away at this moment. "Miss, don't be so ungrateful. No matter what, we brothers have good intentions." As he spoke, he waved his hand behind him. "Come, you guys, give this beautiful lady a good examination." Under the night sky, Shi Mengwan's face was pale. She forced herself to calm down and reached out her hand to the man. "Give me back my phone. I don't need you to examine me." "Miss, maybe you'll need it later." The man in the black jacket smiled evilly. The few people he brought with him had already approached Shi Mengwan. Shi Mengwan was really scared this time. She was only one person, but the other party had 6. She pressed her body tightly against the front cover of the car, still thinking about how to escape. Suddenly, the sound of a car came from behind her. She turned her face, and the lights from the car shone on her face, causing her to narrow her eyes for a moment. The men in the black jacket weren't in a hurry to move. They thought that they would continue after the other party left. Unexpectedly, the car stopped beside them. It was also at this moment that the man in the black jacket saw it clearly. The other party wasn't a car. It was 5 cars. There were 2 Bentleys in front and 2 Bentleys in the back. The one in the middle was a Rolls-Royce Phantom. Even people without common sense were stunned when they saw this row of luxury cars. Not to mention hooligans like the yellow-haired man. Shi Mengwan also saw it clearly now. She saw many tall men in black suits getting out of the cars in front and behind her. Someone opened the back door of the Rolls-Royce, and a pair of extremely slender and powerful legs came out first. In the light of the car lights, the owner of the legs walked towards Shi Mengwan step by step. Shi Mengwan swallowed her saliva. Before she could react, the owner of the legs had already walked in front of her. The few young men were so scared that they didn't dare to speak. Zhang Haoze looked at Shi Mengwan and reached out his hand to her. Shi Mengwan didn't know what to think of, but she actually dodged and pulled her hand back. Not only that, she even took a step to the side. She forgot that there was someone beside her. As she stood there, she bumped into a hooligan standing beside her. This time, Shi Mengwan didn't have time to dodge. Her body moved to the side, but she lost her balance and fell to the side. Zhang Haoze's hand caught her waist in time. In the next second, she was carried horizontally. Pressing her head into his chest, Zhang Haoze gave the leader of the men in black a look. The man understood. The man in the black jacket realized that something was wrong, but it was too late to escape. Soon, waves of wailing and fighting sounds came from behind Zhang Haoze and the others. Shi Mengwan wanted to poke her head out to take a look, but she was already carried into the car by Zhang Haoze. Shi Mengwan and Zhang Haoze hadn't seen each other for almost 2 months. Sitting in the car, she didn't have time to look outside. She just looked at Zhang Haoze and sensitively realized that Zhang Haoze in front of her seemed to be different. Chapter 696. The car was very spacious and very quiet. Shi Mengwan took some time to recover from the frightening moment just now. Just now, she almost thought that she was going to, retracting her thoughts, she looked at Jean Hauser in front of her with complicated emotions. From when she was a young girl until now, every time she was in danger, he was the one who saved her. She couldn't say what she felt in her heart, but at this moment, her mood was very subtle. She couldn't think about anything else, so she just stared blankly at Jean Hauser. Only then did she realize that the person in front of her seemed to be different. After not seeing him for nearly 2 months, Jean Hauser's brows were still the same, but the expression revealed inside was very different. In the past, he was a little dark and arrogant. Looking at him now, his dark and arrogant demeanor was still there. But there was something else. The moment he got out of the car just now, his eyes were cold and his gaze was like a knife. It gave people the feeling that he was a sword that had finally been sharpened. This kind of superior aura made Shi Mengwan subconsciously swallow her saliva. The car was still parked. Shi Mengwan turned around and saw that the man in black who was in the lead outside the car window had already been beaten to the ground. The scene was a little bloody. Shi Mengwan turned around to look at Jean Hauser. Is that enough? If they continued to fight, someone would probably die. Jean Hauser glanced at her and didn't answer. She came out to talk about the factory today. She was wearing a casual suit and her long hair was tied into a ponytail. She looked much more beautiful and youthful. He picked up the ponytail behind her head and leaned over to sniff it gently. This action didn't contain much of an erotic feeling, but Shi Mengwan felt an inexplicable ambiguity, which made her very uncomfortable. It's really enough. She forced herself to focus on something else. Tell them to stop. Jean Hauser still had her hair in his hand. He moved his face closer. Do you know what they wanted to do just now? Shi Mengwan's breathing tightened. Of course she knew. Just call the police. Jean Hauser stared at her face for a long time and knocked on the car window. The people outside almost instantly stopped kicking and hitting. The group of people stood beside the car in front and back. Shi Mengwan couldn't help but turn around to look at Jean Hauser. This person had caused such a big scene. He was probably different now, wasn't he? She didn't have the chance to ask the question in her heart. Those people had already gotten into the car, and the car started up again. She couldn't help but turn to look at him. The person in front of her still had the same face, but she felt a little unfamiliar. Jean Hauser watched as her mind wandered. His lips moved forward and he was about to kiss her lips. Shi Mengwan subconsciously avoided it. Such an action made Jean Hauser's eyes darken. He put his arm around her waist and grabbed her, not letting her leave. He lowered his head and kissed her without warning. Shi Mengwan didn't have time to escape. This time, Jean Hauser kissed her. The lights in the carriage were dim. Occasionally, there was the reflection of the street lamp. His deep facial features could not be seen clearly at this moment. Oh. Shi Mengwan felt pain on her lips. He bit her. She stared at him. He stepped back, but his hand was still on her waist. The distance between the two faces was less than 3 centimeters. The atmosphere in front of him was too intimate. Shi Mengwan wasn't used to it. At this moment, he was at a loss for words. My car, it wasn't just the car. There was also her bag in the car. Don't worry, they will take care of it. His breath brushed against her face. Shi Mengwan was about to step back, but for some reason, she closed her eyes. This way, it seemed like she was inviting Jean Hauser to kiss her. Jean Hauser did as she wished and kissed her once again. Shi Mengwan looked at the 5 cars parked in front of her apartment and felt a headache coming on. She didn't understand why things had become like this again. She looked at Jean Hauser speechlessly. Can you not be so ostentatious? She still had to live in this neighborhood in the future. If others saw Jean Hauser's actions, what would they think? Jean Hauser shook his head. The current situation was special. Although he made a deal with Uncle Chi and took over the Jean family. But the Jean family wasn't peaceful either. The current Jean family was like a volcano under a calm surface that could erupt at any time. Whether it was Jean Yi, Jean Li, or Jean Yang, none of them were convinced of him. In the past month or so, they had been playing tricks behind his back. Jean Hausa didn't take them seriously, but he wouldn't relax with the necessary defensive measures. Why are you still looking for me? Shi Mengwan was angry. I remember that we broke up. I also remember that I didn't agree. He wanted to get out of the car, but Shi Mengwan sat there and refused to get out. Jean Hausa. Shi Mengwan felt tired every time she communicated with him. What do you take me for? What do you take me for? You appear whenever you want and disappear whenever you want. When you disappeared, there was no news at all. When you appeared, you insisted on me cooperating with your performance? What kind of logic is this? Her face was expressionless. The emotions that had arisen when she saw him had all turned into calmness. Jean Hausa looked at her and suddenly reached out to hug her. I'm sorry. Shi Mengwan's body stiffened, but Jean Hausa acted as if he didn't feel it. I'm sorry. I shouldn't have disappeared and appeared whenever I wanted. But if you're unhappy, I can promise you that I won't do this in the future. Shi Mengwan didn't know how to react to this sudden apology. But she quickly remembered that this was the second time Jean Hausa had apologized. Last time, he also said he was sorry, but what happened in the end? It wasn't that Shi Mengwan didn't love him, but she didn't want to believe him anymore. The price of believing him was too high. She realized that she couldn't afford it. Jean Hausa. She should be happy that such a person made such a promise at such a time, but she really couldn't be happy. Do you know? She looked at her fingertips and lowered her eyes. Her expression couldn't be seen clearly. I don't dare to believe your promise anymore. You might not know, but I'm very tired when I'm with you. I often wonder if I did something wrong. I often wonder what you're doing in places that I don't know about. Will those things be dangerous? Jean Hausa. Shi Mengwan finally looked up at him and met his eyes. It's too tiring to be with you. I don't want to be tired anymore. As she spoke, she pushed open the car door and got out. She turned around and went into the apartment. Jean Hausa got out of the car and waved his hand. Although the leader didn't agree, the 5 cars drove away together. Jean Hausa slowed down and followed behind Shi Mengwan. Shi Mengwan quickened her pace, and Jean Hausa followed behind her. When they reached the elevator, she wanted to tell him to stop following her, but this wasn't her home, so she endured it. Jean Hausa didn't seem to notice the disgust in her eyes at all and just followed behind her. They entered the elevator and went upstairs. Shi Mengwan was silent all the way, so he followed her all the way. It wasn't until they stood at the door that Shi Mengwan finally couldn't help but turn around and glare at him. Mr. Jean, don't you have anywhere to go? Shi Mengwan's tone wasn't very good. I believe that with your current status, you should have your own place in Lin City, right? Even if you don't, I believe that Miss Chen would be happy to take you in, so I really don't understand why you keep following me. Jean Hausa looked at the anger on her face. This was her, right? She was lively and full of life. There was an almost imperceptible smile in his eyes. He leaned forward and placed one hand on the door behind her. I do have a place to stay. His face was almost pressed against her face, and his voice was low and seductive. But, I just want to be by your side. This person's words of love were really deadly. Shi Mengwan's body was already tightly pressed against the door behind her. A man's lust would lead people astray. This was really true. The Jean Hausa in front of her could be considered a male version of Daji to her. Shi Mengwan never thought that she would hear Jean Hausa confess like this one day. Looking at his face, she was a little confused. Before she could finish the word, the door behind her opened with a ka. Shi Mengwan was stunned when she almost fell back. She had just steadied herself when she remembered that her bag was still in the car, so she didn't bring the key. Then, she lowered her head and saw Jean Hauser open the door with the key. Her lips opened and closed again. Didn't she ask him to return the key to her? Why did he still have it? When Jean Hauser opened the door, he used his other hand to hold her waist. He brought her in and closed the door. Jean Hauser. Shi Mengwan reached out her hand. Return the key. Wan. Jean Hauser picked her up and held her body firmly in his arms. I miss you so much. He lowered his head and kissed her forehead. Don't you miss me? Who wants to miss you? Shi Mengwan went to pull his hand. Jean Hauser restrained her hand behind her back. Don't you miss me? I don't want to. Jean Hauser kissed her on the lips. Do you want to? Who would miss you? Get out of the way. Jean Hauser remembered again. Do you want to? I said, I don't want to, I don't want to, I don't want to. Jean Hauser, stop fooling around. I really don't miss you. Her voice rose a notch, and her face was flushed with anger. Jean Hauser narrowed his eyes slightly and suddenly carried her horizontally. Since you say you don't want to, then it proves that I've done too little before. It looks like I have to do something to make you remember it often. Jean Hauser, you're shameless. Jean Hauser wasn't angry when he heard this. Instead, he leaned his face close to her ear. Yes, I'll do something even more shameless later. Do you believe me? In terms of being a hooligan, how could Shi Mengwan be his match? Her body was placed on the bed. When she tried to get up, he piled on top of her and pressed her down. If she pushed him, he would have the ability to make her unable to move. The moment her hand was tied by his tie, Shi Mengwan gritted her teeth. You're raping me. Is that so? Jean Hauser narrowed his eyes. Since you said that, I can only think of a way to make you willingly be raped by me. Shi Mengwan didn't understand what Jean Hauser meant. However, when she was teased by him like a kitten and begged for mercy time and time again, she realized that this was really more shameful than being willing to do it. When Shi Mengwan was half awake and half dreaming, she felt herself being gently carried into the bathroom by Jean Hauser. There was no bathtub, so she was carried by him the entire time. After he was done, he carefully dried her dry and carried her out again. He gently placed her on the bed. He took the hairdryer to dry her hair, then pulled up the blanket to cover her body. Shi Mengwan was about to fall asleep, so her body was very tired and sore. So much so that when she saw Jean Hauser like this, not only did she not feel touched, but she felt angry instead. Bastard. She was angry. Jean Hauser, can you not be like a stallion in heat every time? Jean Hauser frowned because of her description. As if he had thought of something, he wrapped her hand in his arms. Sorry, I can't help it. He gently kissed her earlobe and felt her trembling slightly because of his action. He silently curled his lips, and his eyes were filled with joy. My self-control is very poor after meeting you. It was clearly his problem, so why was he blaming her now? Shi Mengwan didn't want to talk to him, and she was very sleepy. She pretended not to hear what Jean Hauser said. She closed her eyes and wanted to sleep, but Jean Hauser didn't allow it. He kissed her on the cheek again. Wan, come with me to Qing City. Shi Mengwan didn't even bother to answer. She didn't want to talk to him at all. I want you to stay by my side. Most importantly, other than those restless cousins, there was also Uncle Chi. He didn't trust anyone. He had to keep her under his nose. Only when he personally watched her and protected her would he be at ease. No. Shi Mengwan refused and turned her back to him. Jean Hauser, I'm not going anywhere. She used her posture to show her resistance. Jean Hauser looked at the back of her head and hooked her into his arms with his big hand. He lowered his head and gently kissed the top of her head. Sleep. If there was anything, he would talk about it after she woke up. Yesterday, Shi Mengwan would rather believe that she was dreaming. In her dream, Zhang Haoze saved her, and in her dream, Zhang Haoze followed her home. Then, the two of them messed around again. She shook her head. This kind of dream wasn't good. It was a nightmare for her. But she didn't expect that when she opened her eyes, Zhang Haoze was still there. Just like before, the dining table was filled with breakfast. Zhang Haoze sat at the dining table. When he saw her get up, he reached out his hand to her. Eat. After yesterday, Shi Mengwan didn't want to argue with Zhang Haoze over such a small matter. If there was anything, she could wait until she finished her breakfast, and then she could slowly talk to him. I'm going out later. After breakfast, without waiting for Shi Mengwan to lay her cards on the table, Zhang Haoze took the initiative to explain his whereabouts. There are some things at the company that I need to deal with. I'll probably be in Lin City for the next few days. You can also pack your luggage and come with me to Qing City when you're ready. When Shi Mengwan heard this, she put down the milk in her hand. Zhang Haoze, I don't think I promised you that I would go to Qing City, right? Wan, stop fooling around. Zhang Haoze wanted to hold her hand, but Shi Mengwan didn't give him the chance. She stood up. Zhang Haoze, didn't you come all the way here just to do what happened last night? You've done it now, and your goal has been achieved. You can leave now. Wan. As for me, I'll never go to Qing City. Give up on that thought. After saying this, she turned around and went back to her room to change her clothes and prepare for work. After taking a few steps, she could feel a certain feeling coming from a certain part of her body. She gritted her teeth and turned around to glare at Zhang Haoze. Would she accompany such a person to Qing City? She wouldn't serve him anymore. He would go wherever he wanted to go. Zhang Haoze sat there without moving. Looking at her figure, the corners of his lips curled up even higher. Zhang Haoze looked at Qin Yongchang in front of him expressionlessly. Qin Yongchang, who was used to liking him in front of him, was completely silent at this moment. There was a hint of flattery in the silence. After a long silence, it was Qin Yongchang who spoke first. Haoze, you haven't been paying much attention to the company these few months. Zhang Haoze was silent. He wanted to send Shi Mengwan to the studio in the morning, but he didn't expect to receive a call from Qin Yongchang. He didn't know how he found out about his return to Lin City, so he came looking for him early in the morning. Zhang Haoze didn't intend to be too ruthless towards Qin Yongchang. However, this didn't mean that he was a soft persimmon that could be bullied by anyone. Don't you have uncle to deal with the company's matters? I thought you wouldn't want to see me interfere too much. Look at what you're saying. No matter what, you and Fei are childhood sweethearts and engaged fiancés. Isn't it normal for you to interfere in the Qin family's business? Uncle, it's better to be careful with your words. I remember that I've already made it clear to Fei that we've already broken off the engagement. Uncle, if you continue to say that, it will affect Fei's reputation outside. Qin Yongchang looked at Zhang Haoze. Even he couldn't help but want to curse. If you really knew that it would affect Fei's reputation, you shouldn't have cancelled the engagement. Haoze, look at what you're saying. Fei is sincere to you. You can't let her down like this, can you? Qin Yongchang endured his unhappiness and once again played the emotional card. He said how they saved Zhang Haoze back then. If it weren't for them, Zhang Haoze would have died on the streets by now. If Zhang Haoze was a person with a conscience, he wouldn't have declined and taken over the Qin Corporation's business. In the past 2 months, Qin Yongchang really felt uncomfortable. When Zhang Haoze was in Lin City, he didn't do anything. However, the company's performance had been thriving. Many cases that seemed difficult to solve at that time became easy in Zhang Haoze's hands. Ever since he wasn't around for the past 2 months, although the Qin Corporation didn't have any major problems, Qin Yongchang found it more and more difficult. He also understood more and more about Zhang Haoze's role and methods. Zhang Haoze sat still and patiently waited for Qin Yongchang to finish talking about the past. He supported his chin with one hand. Then, Uncle Chen, what do you want me to do? He didn't call him uncle anymore. Instead, he added his surname. The alienation was already very obvious. Qin Yongchang didn't hear it. Look at what you're saying. Of course, you're going to re-enter the Qin Corporation and take over your original business. Zhang Haoze wasn't in a hurry to speak. He just looked at Qin Yongchang and stared straight at his face. He couldn't take it anymore. What did he mean? He finally spoke. Go to the Qin Corporation and take over the Qin Corporation's business. Then, wait for me to make the Qin Corporation bigger and stronger, and then let the real ideal person in your heart take over your business, right? Haoze, what nonsense are you talking about? Is it nonsense? Zhang Haoze didn't think so. He stared at Qin Yongchang's face, took out a photo from the drawer, and pushed the photo in front of Qin Yongchang. Seeing the photo, Qin Yongchang's eyes widened. Where did you get this photo? No, how did you know? He did this very secretly, and no one knew about it. Other than a trusted aide who had followed him for many years and took care of him from time to time, no one else knew about this matter, let alone others. Zhang Haoze looked at Qin Yongchang with a hint of mockery in his eyes. Uncle probably doesn't know, but I don't like to fight battles that I'm not confident in. Since you want me to return to the Qin Corporation, support the Qin Corporation again, and bring it to glory, then I have to make sure what benefits I can get from this place. Right? If there's no benefit, why waste my time? But I didn't expect that the matter that Uncle arranged for me not only didn't have any benefits, but also dug such a big pit for me to jump into. He didn't say anything else. Qin Yongchang became anxious. Zhang Haoze, what do you mean? Uncle. Zhang Haoze picked up the photo with an appreciative look in his eyes. When he put it down, his gaze became quite sharp. Making wedding dresses for others is not a good thing. Maybe there are saints who like it, but I don't. Haoze, not to mention, I've already told Feifei that we're going to cancel the wedding. Feifei is a very smart girl. She just didn't understand it for a while. After a long time, she will know that her feelings are just the infatuation of a little girl who doesn't understand love. But, Uncle, you're different. Zhang Haoze's voice was filled with mockery, and every word seemed to hit Qin Yongchang's heart. Uncle, you've doted on Feifei for so many years. You made Feifei think that she was the happiest little princess in the world. But I think she probably never dreamed that she, the Qin family's proudest little princess, wasn't the only one. Because her father, who has always doted on her, had an illegitimate child outside. Zhang Haoze. Qin Yongchang couldn't take it anymore. That's enough. Shut up. Don't say any more. Feifei's health isn't good. You don't want her to be agitated. However, you don't want these assets to fall into the hands of others, so you came to me. Because with me, who owes the Qin family a favor, you can ignore me and treat me as a sacrifice. You can use me to make money for you. You can use me to bring the Qin family to the top again. And once the Qin family reaches the height you want again, you will think of him as a gift to that bastard of yours who is out there. And poor Feifei, she was sacrificed by you just like that. Zhang Haoze's words were very soft. Qin Yongchang's expression was ugly. He wanted to slap the table and scold Zhang Haoze for talking nonsense. But at this moment, the office door was opened with a bang. Chapter 697. Qin Feifei's face was pale, and there was sweat on her forehead. She had always been in poor health. At this time, she had one hand on the wall and the other on her heart. She gasped, looking at the two people in front of her, wishing for a moment that she could faint. But her body, which had always been weak, showed no signs of fainting. She looked at Qin Yongchang and then at Zhang Haoze. His gaze was filled with accusation and accusation. You guys, Feifei? Qin Yongchang's expression changed. But only for a while. There were some things that his daughter would find out sooner or later. Dad. Chin Nan panted and walked step by step towards the two people sitting. Is what Brother Hao said true? Even though Qin Yongchang was used to seeing great storms, he still felt a little guilty when he met his daughter's eyes. He didn't say anything. Chen Feifei turned to Zhan Haoze for an answer. Brother Hao, you wouldn't lie to me, would you? Tell me, is what you just said true? Her face was full of disbelief, but there was still the photo on Zhan Haoze's desk. Chen Feifei snatched it over and looked at the person in the photo. Needless to say, there was no need to ask anymore. He was a very young man who looked like he was still in university. He looked 50% similar to Qin Yongchang. It was just that he was younger and more flamboyant. Chen Feifei felt an unbearable pain in her heart. She thought she would faint again, but she didn't. She put her hands on the desk and stood firm. She stared at Zhan Haoze's face and stubbornly asked for an answer. Zhan Haoze's gaze fell on the photo in her hand. He looked up at Chen Feifei. This person wasn't Shi Mengwan. She was weak and sensitive. She could not bear the impending unveiling of the true would I. Haven't you already seen the photos? Without saying anything more, Chen Feifei staggered and almost fell. She looked at Qin Yongchang again. She suddenly threw the photo away and grabbed Qin Yongchang's shoulder. Dad. Why are you doing this? Didn't you say so? You said I was your little princess. You said I was your only daughter. Didn't you say so? You said that everything in the Chen family will be mine in the future. Why? Why? She asked several questions in a row, insisting on an answer. Qin Yongchang was shaken by her, but he didn't look at her. After Chen Feifei finished shaking, she started to hit Qin Yongchang. How can you do this? How could you do this? Didn't you say that you loved my mother the most? Didn't you say that you would never marry again after she left? Then who was he? Why does he still exist? Dad, how can you face my mom like this? How could you let me down? Dad. How could you do this? Chen Feifei's health was not very good. She did not have much strength at all. As he fought and cried, he went limp. This time, she really fainted. Qin Yongchang's expression finally changed. He quickly picked up Chen Feifei. He just didn't know if it was because he was anxious or something else. When he got up, he loosened his grip and almost dropped Chen Feifei. Zhan Haoze had been watching coldly from the sidelines. Seeing this, he finally made a move. He stepped forward, picked up Chen Feifei, and walked out. Qin Yongchang followed behind him. His voice was sharp and cold. Zhan Haoze, you're too ruthless. You called Feifei here, right? You did it on purpose, didn't you? Zhan Haoze did not answer his question, but he did not deny it either. Qin Yongchang was furious. All right. You're ruthless. That was a beautiful move of yours. Uncle, don't be angry. Zhan Haoze carried Chen Feifei into the elevator. Looking at Qin Yongchang, who was flustered and exasperated, the corners of his lips curled up into a cold smile. According to your plan, it's only a matter of time. You had this plan for a long time. I was just helping you advance it. Qin Yongchang was speechless. Of course, he did not want to reveal it now. At the very least, he had to wait until they got married. At that time, Zhan Haoze would not ignore Chen Feifei. Don't think that you can get away with it. Let me tell you, Feifei is your responsibility. Zhan Haoze did not say anything. He carried Chen Feifei downstairs. The car was already waiting downstairs, just like before. Qin Yongchang looked at the group of people and swallowed the words he wanted to curse. In the end, he got into the car with a toothache. After the rescue, Chen Feifei finally woke up. After she woke up, she didn't want to see Qin Yongchang. She chased Qin Yongchang out, but let Zhan Haoze stay alone. The ward was very quiet. Chen Feifei had already smelled enough of the disinfectant since she was young. She was also tired of smelling it. But because her body was not healthy enough, she had to do it from time to time. She stared out of the window in a daze for a full 10 minutes. She didn't speak, and Jean Hauser didn't speak either. The game had already begun. The engagement had to be broken. In fact, the existence of this engagement was not approved by him. Since it was a mistake, of course he had to correct it. He had patience now. Chen Feifei looked at the setting sun outside. She finally retracted her gaze and faced Jean Hauser. When did you know? Jean Hauser didn't expect her to ask this. He didn't intend to lie to her. A long time ago. How long ago is a long time ago? When you were 18. At that time, Qin Yongchang had already started to let him enter the company and take over some matters. He knew that Qin Yongchang wanted to groom him as a son-in-law. But later, he subtly discovered some differences. Especially after the Qin Corporation went through that danger, it was clearly caused by Qin Yongchang's distrust of him. Although he turned the tide later and reduced the losses, he also successfully let the Qin Corporation fight a beautiful turnaround. But the seed of doubt was planted in his heart. If Qin Yongchang really wanted him to treat Chen Feifei well, or marry Chen Feifei in the future, and take care of the Qin Corporation well, he shouldn't have such an attitude. Although he wanted to solve the Zhan family's matter at that time, he wasn't completely unprepared. After investigating for a while, he found out the reason from many clues. After knowing it, it was much simpler. On the surface, Qin Yongchang was indeed a good father and husband. But deep down, he had some traditions. He wanted his son to inherit the family business. His kindness to Chen Feifei was real. But his kindness came with conditions. And all of this was seen through by Jean Hauser. So early? Chen Feifei's eyes widened. After understanding the key point, she didn't care about how Jean Hauser found out. There was only one thought in her mind. Brother Hao. You really don't like me, do you? If he liked her a little, he wouldn't treat her like this. Jean Hauser was silent. He thought for a moment and told the truth. In my heart, you're my sister. Sister? Heh. Chen Feifei smiled bitterly, her eyes full of mockery. Yes, I'm your sister, so you don't have to feel sorry for me. You don't have to pity me. You asked me to your company and let me hear such a cruel truth. Brother Hao, you're so cruel. Jean Hauser didn't deny it. Chen Feifei took a deep breath and calmed herself down. Why did you do this? Just to break off the engagement with me? Yes. He knew Shi Mengwan's heart not. If he wanted Chen Feifei to publicly break off the engagement in front of everyone in Lin City, he had to make Chen Feifei stand up. The current situation was that Shi Mengwan didn't believe his words. But if Chen Feifei stood up, Shi Mengwan would believe it. Chen Feifei's lips were pursed into a straight line. Her pale face and red eyes would make any man feel pity for her. Brother Hao, do you have a woman you like? Jean Hauser pursed his lips slightly and didn't deny it. Chen Feifei smiled. She seemed to have grown up in an instant and suddenly understood many things. You have someone you like, so you don't like me. The person you like might have misunderstood our relationship, so you want me to explain, right? She looked at Jean Hauser and knew that her guess was true. She smiled bitterly with a bitter expression. A girl who can make you care about her like this must be very beautiful, right? Yes. Jean Hauser nodded. In my heart, she's the most beautiful. The generous praise made Chen Feifei's face turn even paler. She bit her lip and her fingertips trembled. What do you want me to do? You'll announce the news of our breaking off the engagement. You can find any reason. I don't mind. In other words, Chen Feifei could be the reasonable one. She could make up any reason. She looked up at Jean Hauser. Aren't you afraid that if I say you're bad, the girl you like won't like you? No. Jean Hauser's voice was very soft. He thought of Shi Mengwan. No matter what I am, she will like me. Chen Feifei clenched her fists tightly to control herself from crying. Zhang Hao's gentle tone when he talked about that woman was something he had never used on her before. What if I don't agree? You will agree. Zhang Hao looked at her fixedly. Because you're a smart girl. Chen Feifei smiled. Brother Hao, do you know? This is the first time you've praised me. But I'm not happy at all. Zhang Hao was still silent. He did have sibling feelings for Chen Feifei. There was also gratitude. But that was all. Brother Hao. I will agree to you. But I also hope that you can agree to 2 conditions. Chen Feifei's expression seemed to have changed. She was much calmer than before. Don't worry, just 2. And I won't make things difficult for you. Go ahead. Chen Feifei stared at her fingernails. In the shortest time possible, many thoughts had already flashed through her mind. Everything that happened today was a huge blow to her. If possible, she really hoped that she was still the happy little princess of the Chen family. But now, she knew that she couldn't be that carefree little princess anymore. First, I can't agree to break off the engagement with you immediately. Give me some time. Zhang Hao frowned. Chen Feifei looked at him. Brother Hao, if I stand up right now and say that I'll break off the engagement with you, it will be very bad for the company. I need to use your name. 3 months. 3 months was the limit of his patience. Chen Feifei looked at him deeply and finally nodded. Okay, 3 months. The second thing is that I haven't completely mastered the company yet. I also know that I won't be able to master it very quickly in a short period of time. I hope that you can help me, Brother Hao. It doesn't matter if it's you or if you find someone. I don't want the company to fall into the hands of unrelated people. When Chen Feifei said that she didn't want to do it, a flash of gloominess flashed across her face. It was true that the Qin Corporation belonged to Qin Yongchang, but without her mother's power and help, Qin Yongchang wouldn't have been able to develop the company to its current state. The company belonged to Qin Yongchang, and it was also her mother's. She didn't want outsiders to get involved in any way. But she couldn't do it alone. She needed help. Brother Hao, I know you can do it, right? Zhang Hao looked at Chen Feifei. No matter what, they had grown up together. The change in Chen Feifei in front of him was unexpected, but it seemed to be reasonable. After all, after such a major change, it would really be abnormal if the person in front of him was still the same as before. I can. Thank you, Brother Hao. Chen Feifei smiled at him gratefully. There's one more thing. Chen Feifei seemed to realize that she had more than 3 conditions. Her expression was a little awkward, but Zhang Hao didn't mind. Go ahead. Chen Feifei bit her lip. Her expression was conflicted, painful, hesitant, but in the end, it was firm. My father, he's getting old. I think he needs a good rest. Tell me, as his daughter, if I send him to a place with a good environment to spend the rest of his life, others won't be able to accuse me of being unfilial, right? When Zhang Hao heard this, the corners of his lips curled up slightly. Look, this was Chen Feifei. No matter how weak she looked on the outside, she was actually a person with a clear goal inside. He was not surprised or shocked that she had such a thought. Of course. Zhang Hao nodded. Feifei, you're so attentive. Others will only say that you're a good daughter and a very filial daughter. Chen Feifei seemed to heave a sigh of relief. Yes. I'm a good daughter. There was a hint of bitterness in her words, as well as something else. Zhang Hao didn't care anymore. He stood up. It was getting late, and he still wanted to go back and have dinner with Shi Mengwan. You decide the location. After you decide, I'll be responsible for sending uncle to recuperate. Chen Feifei nodded. The moment Zhang Hao turned around, she called out to him again. Brother Hao? Zhang Hao turned around. Chen Feifei gritted her teeth, as if she was going all out. Since my father is going to retire, someone has to take care of him. Someone has to take care of him, and my cheap little brother should be the most suitable candidate. Right? She blinked her big eyes and looked at Jean Hauser. At this moment, she didn't pretend at all. Jean Hauser smiled. This was a rare smile that he showed in front of Chen Feifei. Of course. No one is more suitable than him. Chen Feifei seemed to be relieved. She looked up at Jean Hauser and reached out her hand to him. Brother Hao, can you hug me? Just treat it as your final farewell. Jean Hauser looked at her and gently put his arm around her shoulder. Just as he was about to step back, Chen Feifei suddenly tightened her arms. He felt her trembling. She buried her face in his chest. Brother Hao, I'm really jealous of her. After saying this, she let go of her hand and turned her face away. Brother Hao, you should go quickly. Otherwise, I'll regret it. Jean Hauser looked at Chen Feifei. He had watched her grow up. Feifei, take care of yourself in the future. I believe that the Chen family will definitely flourish in your hands. Of course. Chen Feifei didn't turn her head, but her eyes were much more determined than when she first woke up. In the past, she only wanted to be in love, but now she knew. What love? It's all fake. If even someone close to you could betray you, what else was real? Only the benefits that were in his hands were real. Jean Hauser left the ward. As soon as he left, Chen Yongchang came over. What did Feifei say to you? How is she? Chen Yongchang looked in the direction of the ward. He wanted to get closer just now, but he was stopped by Jean Hauser's bodyguard. Jean Hauser glanced at Chen Yongchang. Thinking of Chen Feifei's request just now, he felt a little sympathy for Chen Yongchang. In some ways, Chen Feifei was the same kind of person as him. This was also the reason why he could never fall in love with Chen Feifei. Even though he had been with Chen Feifei for more than 10 years. Uncle Chen, go and see Feifei. As for what I said to her, let her tell you herself. Jean Hauser wasn't in the mood to stay any longer. This time, when he returned to Lin City, the matter in front of him was his first priority. Now that it was resolved, his footsteps were a little lighter. After getting into the car, the driver didn't need to ask. He drove directly to Shi Mengwan's apartment. When he entered, he smelled the aroma of food in the room. That familiar smell and familiar environment made Jean Hauser's expression relax for an instant. He changed his shoes and went straight into the kitchen. Shi Mengwan had already cooked a dish. Just as she took it out and placed it on the cooking table, she felt her waist being hugged. She was shocked and the pot in her hand almost fell to the ground. Jean Hauser reached out to help her hold it steady, then put it back on the stove. She turned around and glared at him. Don't you know how to make a sound when you walk? You scared me to death, don't you know? Sorry. Jean Hauser pecked her lips. I scared you. Shi Mengwan looked at him and felt that he seemed especially happy today. Are you happy that you scared me? No. Jean Hauser couldn't help but peck her lips again. Shi Mengwan reached out and pressed against his chest when he wanted to deepen his kiss. That's enough. I still have to cook. Get out of the way. Don't disturb me. Jean Hauser didn't let go. Instead, he glanced at the cooking table. What else do you want to cook? Stir-fried beef and this, spicy and sour shredded potatoes. Shi Mengwan glanced at him as she spoke. Her voice was very soft. I only know how to cook some home-cooked dishes. If you don't like it, you can eat outside. Jean Hauser glanced at her. It was rare to see her so cute. He reached out and rubbed the top of her hair. Go and rest. I'll do it. Shi Mengwan was stunned for a moment. She watched as Jean Hauser took off his suit jacket, then unbuttoned the sleeves of his shirt and rolled them up twice. You know how to cook. Shi Mengwan's voice was a little trembling. That wasn't possible, right? She had never seen him cook before, so she thought that he didn't know how to cook. Now that he looked like he was about to make a move, he stood there a little nervously, obviously worried. You don't believe me? Chapter 698. Shi Mengwan looked at the handsome face in front of her and nodded without giving him any face. Zhang Haoze narrowed his eyes when he heard her words. His gaze was too dangerous. Shi Mengwan wanted to retreat, but it was already too late. Zhang Haoze pulled her back into his arms. He lowered his head and kissed her until her hands and feet went soft. He pressed his forehead against hers, and his voice was a little hoarse. All right, let's go outside. I'll cook the remaining 2 dishes. Shi Mengwan's legs were a little soft. She leaned against the wall and looked at Zhang Haoze. She felt that he was a little different. He pushed her gently. Go. I'll call you later. Even if Shi Mengwan didn't believe him, she could only go out now. She wiped the dining table and went into the kitchen again. She saw that Zhang Haoze was really cooking. Are you that worried? Shi Mengwan didn't dare to answer Zhang Haoze's question anymore. She took the bowl and chopsticks and quickly left. She had just put it away. Coincidentally, she received a call. A client had some ideas about the design. Shi Mengwan listened patiently and then wrote them down. After she had made an appointment with the client, she was done. When she turned around, Zhang Haoze had already come out of the kitchen. He was holding 2 dishes in his hand. After putting them away, he looked at her. Come, let's eat. Shi Mengwan looked at him suspiciously. She took a few steps forward and looked at the dishes on the table. She bought onions to stir-fry beef today. This dish looked simple, but it wasn't easy to make. Beef was a relatively difficult dish to make. If the heat wasn't right, the beef wouldn't be cooked, and the taste wouldn't be good. If the heat was too hot, the beef would be overcooked, and it wouldn't taste good. Shi Mengwan looked at the beef on the table. It looked pretty good in terms of appearance. She sat down and tasted it. She looked at Zhang Haoze in surprise. When did you learn to cook? She really couldn't tell at all. Zhang Haoze didn't answer her question. How does it taste? Not bad. It was indeed not bad. Shi Mengwan was more curious about how he learned it. Zhang Haoze didn't say anything. Instead, he scooped a bowl of soup for her and placed it in front of her. Shi Mengwan had done this action many times before. Now that Zhang Haoze was doing the same thing to her, her heart suddenly felt warm. Many thoughts flashed through her mind. Those uncertain thoughts that wanted to resist seemed to have faded again because of the changes caused by Zhang Haoze's return. She couldn't resist him when he was cold and indifferent, and now that he was gentle, she couldn't resist him. What to do? Shi Mengwan. Are you going to sink into oblivion again? The taste of the food was to her liking, but she didn't really like it. She looked up at him and found that he was also looking at her. Her eyes were gentle, and there was a faint smile on her face. Her heart skipped another beat. She rarely saw Zhang Haoze smiling like this. Do you have any plans for tomorrow? Zhang Haoze's voice brought Shi Mengwan back to her senses. She glanced at him. Yes, there's a design that needs to be fixed tomorrow. She had to change the client's request tomorrow. Very urgent? It's all right. They were all regular customers, so there was no rush. Then why don't you free a day and let's go play? Shi Mengwan was stunned. Go play? Where are we going? You can think about where you want to go. Shi Mengwan lowered her head to eat. Was he asking her out on a date? This time, wasn't he afraid of meeting someone he knew again? It's not the weekend, so there shouldn't be many people. So you can think about it. Shi Mengwan originally wanted to say that they should go to the new amusement park that opened this year, but when she met Zhang Haoze's eyes, she said, let's go to Mount Qin. I haven't climbed a mountain in a long time. Zhang Haoze's expression didn't change. He nodded lightly. Okay. Then let's climb Mount Qin. He looked like he didn't think of anything, but it was also as if Mount Qin was just an ordinary mountain to him. Shi Mengwan's mood was inexplicably conflicted. Did he forget, or, at night, Shi Mengwan looked at Zhang Haoze, who was sleeping beside her. She felt that he had changed a lot. Can't sleep? Zhang Haoze didn't do anything to her today. He just hugged her to sleep. No. Shi Mengwan turned over and wanted to sleep with her back to him. Zhang Haoze turned her body around again. His hand was a little unruly on her body. Shi Mengwan instinctively resisted. Stop fooling around. Aren't we going to climb the mountain tomorrow? It's okay. Zhang Haoze kissed her neck. If you can't climb anymore, I'll carry you. In the end, Shi Mengwan couldn't win against Zhang Haoze, so she let him have his way once. However, Zhang Haoze knew when to stop. He only came once and let her go. She couldn't sleep at first, but after being tormented by him like this, she fell asleep very peacefully. Shi Mengwan sat in the car. When she arrived at the foot of Mount Qin, she was still a little dazed. Ever since she got separated from her dear brother here when she was 13, she had never come here again. To her, this was a sad place. She had always regretted it and was very upset. If she hadn't suggested coming here, her dear brother wouldn't have met those bad people, and she wouldn't have been separated from him. Shi Mengwan's emotions were complicated at this moment, but she looked at Zhang Haoze as if nothing had happened. Mount Qin had changed a lot compared to more than 10 years ago. A road had been built at the foot of the mountain, leading straight to the mountainside. This was originally a hilly area, so the mountain wouldn't be too high. Shi Mengwan sat in the car and watched the car go up the mountain. Finally, they stopped in the parking lot halfway up the mountain. When she got out of the car, she looked at the car in front of her and behind her. When she turned to face Zhang Haoze, she was a little conflicted. Can you not let them follow us? Okay. It was rare for Zhang Haoze to be so easy to talk to. Shi Mengwan heaved a sigh of relief. The scenery at the top of the mountain was quite good. Shi Mengwan didn't have many memories of Mount Qin. All her memories were of her dear brother being beaten, bleeding, and her loss. Now that her mood was different, she walked up and looked at the beautiful scenery on both sides. She was in the mood to appreciate it. She walked too fast and tripped over a small stone by the side of the road. Her body tilted, and Zhang Haoze quickly hugged her waist to stabilize her body. This scene was a little similar. She turned to look at him, and her eyes were misty. Zhang Haoze looked at her snuggling in his arms and leaned over to kiss her. Shi Mengwan's face turned red for a moment, but Zhang Haoze let go of her at this moment. Let's go. Shi Mengwan lowered her head. She wanted to walk forward quickly, but Zhang Haoze held her hand. She was stunned again and turned to look at him. However, he held her hand and continued walking forward. It was actually a little cold in Lin City during this season, especially when the mountain wind blew. However, Shi Mengwan's hand was held by Zhang Haoze. His hand was very warm, very hot. That kind of heat made Shi Mengwan ignore the coldness in her hand. Other than the big rock that looked like a zither, there were a few other strange rocks in Mount Qin. Although it couldn't be compared to a famous mountain like Mount Huang, the scenery was quite good. The two of them went up the mountain together. Because it wasn't a weekend, there weren't many people. Shi Mengwan's playfulness finally came to an end after she saw the huge zither stone. She took out her phone to take a picture. The huge stone was like a huge zither because of the changes of time. Shi Mengwan's hand touched it and she turned to look at Zhang Haoze. She almost subconsciously said, "Dear brother, I'll climb up." Shi Mengwan didn't say anything else. More than 10 years ago, Mount Qin hadn't been developed yet. When it wasn't a tourist attraction, no one came here at all. She had once followed her dear brother and climbed up that huge zither. Now that she had grown up and there were tourists passing by the mountain from time to time, she was too embarrassed to climb up. Zhang Haoze held her waist. "Do you want to go up?" If you want to go up, I'll carry you up. The stone zither was huge, so it was naturally very tall. Shi Mengwan shook her head. Realizing that she had made a mistake just now, her interest was halved. No, I'd better be a civilized tourist. Looking at Zhang Haoze, she handed her phone to him. She didn't say anything, but Zhang Haoze understood what she meant. After taking a few photos, Shi Mengwan was about to take her phone back when a couple came up. They were also here to play. When they saw Shi Mengwan and the girl, their eyes lit up. Beauty, help us take a photo together. Sure. Shi Mengwan didn't refuse. She took the other party's phone and took a photo of them. She took a few photos from all angles. When the girl took the phone, she thanked Shi Mengwan profusely. Thank you, Beauty. Your boyfriend is also very handsome. Why don't I take a photo for you guys too? Before Shi Mengwan could say anything, Zhang Haoze had already handed the phone to the girl. The girl clicked her tongue. There was a hint of surprise in her eyes. The man was handsome and the woman was beautiful. Such a model was also very pleasing to the eye. Shi Mengwan was still a little uncomfortable when Zhang Haoze stood over. Zhang Haoze put his arm around her shoulder. They looked at the camera together. Shi Mengwan subconsciously curled the corners of her lips. At this moment, the hand on her shoulder suddenly exerted a little force. She looked at Zhang Haoze in confusion. At this moment, he leaned over and kissed her on the lips. Shi Mengwan's eyes widened, but she heard the sound of the camera. The scene froze there. Shi Mengwan was a little embarrassed. After the couple left, she quickly left Zhang Haoze's side. Other than this huge rock that looked like a zither, there were also some other rocks of different shapes on Mount Qin. Shi Mengwan didn't have a deep memory of the time she came here when she was young. Her mood was different when she revisited this old place. She turned to look at Zhang Haoze, and he was also looking at her. She wanted to ask him a few times if he was her dear brother, but in the end, there was only silence. Forget it, why ask again? Even if she asked, Zhang Haoze wouldn't admit it. Opening her heart, Shi Mengwan let herself play happily. As for the rest of the things, for now. It was almost noon when they came down from Mount Qin. The two of them got into the car. Shi Mengwan was tired. She stayed in the office every day, and this trip to the mountain was a little tiring. On the other hand, Zhang Haoze. His expression didn't change, and he was calm and composed. It didn't affect him at all. Compared to other people, the difference was really big. When the car passed by the foot of the mountain, Shi Mengwan looked outside. That was the place where she had lost contact with her dear brother. She turned to look at Zhang Haoze, but he didn't react at all. Was he really her dear brother? She couldn't forget those memories and time for so many years, but Zhang Haoze seemed to have completely forgotten. Did he have some accident and lose his memory, or was there some inside story that she didn't know? She thought of Zhang Haoze's current status. It was already different from the past. Perhaps, that experience of being a hooligan wasn't what he wanted. Was that why he avoided talking about it? Was that so? Are you hungry? What do you want to eat for lunch? Zhang Haoze's face enlarged in front of her. Shi Mengwan realized that she was actually staring at Zhang Haoze and felt a little embarrassed. Whatever. Zhang Haoze glanced at her and wasn't annoyed. The car finally stopped at a very famous Western restaurant in the center of Lin City. Shi Mengwan followed Zhang Haoze into the door. Before the two of them could sit down, someone who knew Zhang Haoze came over. When the other party saw Zhang Haoze, he came over to greet him. When Zhang Haoze was exchanging pleasantries with the other party's gaze swept over Shi Mengwan. Shi Mengwan felt a little uncomfortable and wanted to pull her hand back, but she felt Zhang Haoze put his arm around her shoulder and introduced her very calmly, "This is my girlfriend." She was stunned on the spot. Did Zhang Haoze know what he was talking about? She didn't even notice that person's ambiguous gaze. After all, at this stage, everyone who knew Jean Hauser knew that he had a fiancée. Now, he had another girlfriend. However, looking at Jean Hauser's gaze, that person wouldn't look for trouble. He left after saying hello. After that person left, Shi Mengwan stood there and looked at Jean Hauser. Do you know what you're talking about? You're my girlfriend to begin with. Jean Hauser looked at her. I promised you. She wanted a status, so he would give her a status. Shi Mengwan sat there and looked at Jean Hauser, who was completely different from her memories. She couldn't help but feel her heartbeat quicken. Once again, she was moved by the heart in front of her. Wan. Jean Hauser held her hand. With a focused expression, he said, "Come back to Qing City with me." At this moment, Shi Mengwan couldn't say anything to reject him. She just stared at Jean Hauser in a daze. She actually had an uncontrollable urge in her heart. She really wanted to throw everything aside and go with him. In the next few days, Jean Hauser and Shi Mengwan seemed to have returned to that period of time. He was very busy. After all, he had to deal with a lot of work this time and then prepare to go to Qing City. But every night, he would definitely have dinner with her. Shi Mengwan's apartment was very small. Jean Hauser suggested that she change places, but she didn't want to. She wasn't sure how long Jean Hauser could maintain his current appearance. More importantly, if he wanted to leave one day. What was she going to do? A week passed, and Jean Hauser seemed to be even busier. Shi Mengwan knew that he was busy, so she didn't plan to disturb him. She also took this opportunity to negotiate with the two OEM factories. Song-seeking studio could also be considered to have taken a big step forward. Shi Mengwan was in a good mood. Thinking about how her relationship with Jean Hauser was slowly getting better during this period of time, she suddenly had a sudden impulse and wanted to celebrate with Jean Hauser. Chen Feifei looked at Jean Hauser in front of her. After not seeing him for a week, the person in front of her seemed to have changed again. There was still a cold look in his eyes, but there was a hint of gentleness. Needless to say, this must be the power of love. She was really jealous of the woman who had Jean Hauser's heart. However, she knew better than anyone what the most important thing was right now. Brother Hao. I'm sorry. It seems that I'll have to trouble you tomorrow. Chen Feifei thought that she was a very filial daughter. Therefore, she spent a lot of effort on Qin Yongchang's retirement home. In the end, she finally chose a small town in Canada. The environment was good, and the people were simple. Everything could be said to be perfect. The only imperfection now was that Qin Yongchang didn't want to go. These few days, because of some of her and Jean Hauser's actions, he had been losing his temper at home. You're welcome. I will naturally do what I promised you. It was very simple to bring Qin Yongchang onto the plane. It wasn't too difficult for Qin Yongchang to stay abroad for the rest of his life. There was a hint of mockery in Chen Feifei's eyes. Do you know? My dad has been scolding me at home for the past few days. She had been in the company for the past few months, so she had some understanding of the company. It would still take time for her to completely snatch the company back into her hands. Qin Yongchang wanted to resist, but with Jean Hauser around, he was greatly suppressed. These few days, Qin Yongchang had been scolding people at home. Of course, he wasn't only scolding Chen Feifei, but also Jean Hauser. He said that I have no conscience and that you're an ingrate. I think it's really funny. He was the one who said that everything in the Qin family would be mine in the future. Why is he so angry now that I just got it in advance? Jean Hauser couldn't answer her question. Chen Feifei smiled. Forget it. Let's not talk about him. Brother Hao. Let's have lunch together. Before Jean Hauser rejected her, Chen Feifei raised her index finger. Don't be in a hurry to reject me. That old fox from Desheng Corporation has arranged to meet at noon today. You know that he has always been lustful. I'm afraid I'll suffer a loss in his hands. Anyway, you've helped me so much. I think you don't mind going to a meal with me, right? She leaned forward a little. If I can settle this deal with Desheng ahead of time, I can also establish my authority in the company ahead of time. Maybe I'll come out earlier to break off the engagement. Jean Hauser was speechless, but that old fox, Desheng, did not have a good reputation. However, he had some connections behind him. There were benefits to cooperating with him, but this person had a bad reputation. Let's go. Even if Chen Feifei didn't say it, he would still help with these small favors. Thank you, Brother Hao. You're the best. Chen Feifei smiled innocently, looking the same as many years ago. Only they themselves knew that Chen Feifei's smile was completely different. After going downstairs, before Chen Feifei got into the car, she hooked her arm around Jean Hauser's. Brother Hao, I've wronged you. Act as a couple with me. Don't worry. Just this once. I promise I won't trouble you next time. When she gained a foothold in the Qin Corporation, she really didn't need Jean Hauser to appear. She just needed to put on a show. Jean Hauser glanced at her. At this point, he seemed to be a little helpless. I didn't say I wouldn't help you. Thank you very much. The two of them got into the car together and headed to the place where Chen Feifei had agreed to meet. Jean Hauser instructed someone to drive. What he didn't expect was that Shi Mengwan, who was across the street and wanted to explain things to Jean Hauser, happened to see the scene of Jean Hauser and Chen Feifei leaving arm in arm when she saw him come out. With a cold face, she watched Jean Hauser bring Chen Feifei into the car with a doting expression. She also saw Chen Feifei's overly bright smile. That scene looked like a loving and affectionate couple. Shi Mengwan suddenly felt that all the words of love she had heard yesterday had turned into a joke. She sat in the car and gripped the steering wheel tightly. There was no trace of emotion in her eyes. Shi Mengwan watched as the shocking motorcade left the building of Jean Hauser's company. She also got into the car and started the car to leave. However, this time, she wasn't going back to the studio. Instead, she was going home. That day, not only did Jean Hauser accompany Chen Feifei to complete the Desheng project, he also made a trip to the Qin Corporation. Appearing with Chen Feifei could be considered as establishing his prestige. After so many days in the Qin Corporation, his prestige wasn't much inferior to Qin Yongchang's. Many people had always regarded him as the future head of the Qin Corporation. Now that Qin Yongchang said that he was not feeling well and needed to recuperate, the person who took over was Chen Feifei. Everyone was a little worried, but when they saw Jean Hauser, there was nothing to worry about. After all, with Jean Hauser around, the Qin Corporation would only get better and better. Chen Feifei looked at the way those people looked at Jean Hauser and clicked her tongue. Big Brother Hao, your existence is like a great Buddha. With you around, these people won't dare to look down on me. Thank you for supporting me. You're welcome. Jean Hauser was expressionless. I'm just returning your favor. Tisk, you've returned the favor of saving my life just like that. Why do I feel like I'm at a loss? Chen Feifei couldn't be bothered to hide herself in front of Jean Hauser now. Jean Hauser glanced at her. Or, would you like Uncle to stay? No need. Chen Feifei didn't dare to tease him anymore. All right. I promise you, we're even. Jean Hauser entered her office and looked at some of the recent cases of the Qin Corporation. He then roughly told Chen Feifei some things to pay attention to. After all, Chen Feifei studied business, so she took over these things very quickly. He believed that even if he returned to Qing City in 2 days, it wouldn't affect him much. He spent the entire afternoon at the Qin Corporation. He rejected Chen Feifei's suggestion to have dinner together. He was going to have dinner with Shi Mengwan. You're so anxious to see your sweetheart. I really want to meet her. Jean Hauser glanced at her and didn't respond. Before everything was completely stable, he didn't want Shi Mengwan to appear in front of Chen Feifei. After leaving the Qin Corporation, he went straight back to Shi Mengwan's apartment, but he found that she wasn't at home. Jean Hauser was stunned for a moment. At this time, she should have already returned from the studio. Looking at the empty house, he took out his phone and made a call. Shi Mengwan didn't pick up his call. He called again, but no one picked up. Later, Shi Mengwan's phone was turned off. Holding his phone, he looked at the living room in front of him in a daze. What was Shi Mengwan doing? 10 minutes later, Zhang Hao's men brought news. Shi Mengwan had gone home. Go home? Why was she going home at this time? You're tuning in to the Dreamy Chapters YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.